So, welcome back to the Film Gamer podcast. This is episode number 28 overall, season 3, episode 21, where we are counting down the top 23 Best Picture winners. According to me, I have not seen all of them. I've seen 50 out of 96, but, we can assume that the other, 46 aren't good. Now, I'll probably see one, but I mean, one thing that I wonder about my life is that when I go and I don't know, when I go and the movies that are left that I haven't seen, the hidden gems, uh, a lot of the times, and this sounds so distressing, they're kind of hidden for a reason. Like how do I say this? I mean, they're not great. Yeah, they're not great. It's about as great as me trying to lock in the settings on this recorder of this phone that I'm trying to do at the same time. And I think it works as long as I don't fiddle with it. Of course, partway through, I'm going to think of, oh, it would be better if it was this setting, and I'm going to go change it, and then it's going to be like, oh, why did I mess with it? It's messed up now. But no, let's get back to it before I screw up. We're going to count down. We ended off with Casablanca. Which is, one of the greatest films of all time. I'll tell you what makes that movie so great. It's 106 minutes long. When I tell you, like, when I was little and I was able to watch DVDs on my own, but I also had nothing else to do. You know, that age before you get serious homework and you have school, but like, you don't. I mean, I guess you don't, because, like, if you're popular, unlike me, I mean, I was popular. I had a few friends, but, like, a lot of my time was spent indoors playing video games and watching movies, and more watching movies, way more watching movies since the pandemic. I even, like, said to my mom, I'm like, I think I've kind of grown deeper into my obsession since the pandemic. And she's like, yes, you have. And I'm like, oh, but it's not too bad, because when I look back on my life weirdly, I remember one time I was playing a Thanksgiving football game. Um, and I came to it a bit later, I think. And because I was playing Killzone 2, so this must have been in 2009, or it could have been Killzone 3. I'll presume it was Killzone 2 because that sounds right. Anyway, beautiful game. And I was like just watching the credits after having beat it. It's just like a 6 hour game, but I beat it on hard mode. And my brother was coming back. He's like, "Are you playing? Are you playing?" Because we only play that like once a year. And it was like one of those of like, oh, am I gonna regret, you know, not going out and playing football with my brothers and sister and stuff? And I'd played before, years before. In fact, there was like an accident year before. Maybe if we dig deep into my mind, that's why I didn't go out so enthusiastically or something. Or maybe I'm completely misremembering and it was just like a weekend where everybody was there. But nonetheless, like, I really like that game. Killzone 2 is one of my favorite. It's the reason I saved up for a PS3 and is one of my like favorite games of all time. It's a beautiful game. You even can look at some of like the technical stuff on what they were doing on that system now with the cell architecture now, and it's still like a beautiful game that like holds up like visually well. And even Digital Foundry did a deep dive on it 10 years ago, and they're like, yeah, even like the third one, they like fixed some stuff, but yeah, 2 is like an amazing looking game, and they haven't done it since. Because, fun fact about that game is that the bozos at Sony at the time were like so overconfident after the PlayStation 2, which is still today the highest selling video game console of all time. The outgoing CEO just said that they sold 160 million and gave an update. Why? Because the Nintendo Switch is up to like 138 million and might surpass it soon. So they just kind of kicked the ball down the field further. And to be fair, the PlayStation 2 dropped down to like 120 bucks and then 99 bucks. Like, it was selling well even into 2014 because people were playing it just for FIFA. Which all it was getting roster updates. Kind of fascinating. Best selling console of all time, even though not my favorite game selection. Anyway, so this console is so successful that, in Sony's mind, they're untouchable. and Xbox is developing a console, and they had lost so much money on the Xbox, but didn't care because they had market penetration on par with Nintendo. So they were like thrilled, and they were going to integrate MSN Online based online architecture in order to deliver online video games, essentially as we know them today. And this was back in 2005 that they did this. So they were planning, if you go back and look at their E3 presentation before they came out with the Xbox 360, it is so future forward. It is impressive that these are the people that when you look at them today, it's kind of like they don't know what they're doing in the game space or have any plan. But there, if you go back to the summer of 2005, it's amazing how prescient they are. And it's a shame, I guess, that they couldn't keep those people around because Xbox kind of screwed it up for like 2 generations in a row, even though I use them as a media center. But um, for the Xbox 360 seventh generation era, they were on top of the world and they beat Sony at their own game. And Sony was so cocky that they were like, you know what? Next gen starts when we say it starts. So they, the PlayStation 3 got delayed. The Xbox 360 came out, blew the doors off everything. I remember it was like the first social console that everybody saw. And Sony was like, oh, crap. Like, are things coming out? It's going to be like 599 US dollars compared to the Xbox, which was like just 500 bucks. Or you could even get one, I believe, for 400 bucks, but it had no hard drive, which caused a lot of problems with, saving games and that kind of thing because people didn't know about hard drives at the time. But Sony was like, we need something. We need like something to blow the doors off. So they came out with this E3 presentation for this game, Killzone 2. Now, the first Killzone game I played on PlayStation 2, and it was fine and looked pretty cool. Done by this German developer, Guerrilla Games. And they are coming out with 2, and they're developing it. And they have this internal, this is what developers have sometimes, a target render of like a CGI creation of like, this is what we want the game to look like. And it was just meant to be developed internally. What happens is that the heads at Sony, one of the suits sees that and without telling the developers, puts that out on E3 and broadcasts it to everyone. And you got to remember, E3 is the one, this is back when the media was less like understanding of video games. Like they sort of get them now. There's the odd person who's like, I don't play video games, but sort of like 70% of people, like in the post Wii generation, they know what a video game is, what it looks like, what the infrastructure is. And if they don't, then they'll figure it out once their kid is charging their credit card for Fortnite. Back then, they didn't know that. The only time people kind of heard a headline about a video game was at A3. So that's where CNN came. That's when, CTV, City TV, NBC, CBS, ABC, that's when they all came out and did their, 15 minutes of, and now the new video game comes out and it's going to be a big gift this holiday season, blah, blah, blah. This Sony executive broadcasts the target render of something that the developers don't even know if the PlayStation is capable of. And they put out the famous Killzone 3 trailer. That's like a mock-up of what the game is supposed to look like. And this is like 3 years before the game can even come out, and people don't know when the game is coming out. And there were a lot of like PlayStation 3 previews, but people were like, oh my God, it's photorealistic, it's this and that. You watch it, and it's very obviously like in 720p or something like that, and it looks dated now. And of course, they've done amazing things since then with Killzone Shadowfall, which opened the PS4 demo, and that was like still probably the last time anybody was blown away by graphics is the 2012 PlayStation 4 reveal with Killzone Shadowfall. But with Killzone 2 and what they were showing, because Gears of War had come out, and that was the big gear turner for the Xbox that people were like, oh, you got to play this game. It's unlike anything you've ever played. So they show this, the developers panic, and they're furious because the executives didn't tell them that they were going to show their game. And now we're like, oh crap, we have such a high internal render target. Now, like, how are we going to do this to make it live up to the hype? And so, what ends up happening is they take a long time to develop it. Comes out in February 2009, and they do so many things like that aren't even done in video games today that are so amazing. It's an underappreciated game. One of the things they had to do was because the CPU, the central brain of this PlayStation, was kind of its weakest part. Its processor wasn't super fast, and they're adding in all these effects. What happens is that introduces a substantial input lag. So when you like turn right with the toggle, it doesn't turn right away. Right away. What do they do to get around this? Because they have to hit that render target and not disappoint people with how amazing this visual game looks. They add weight to all of the guns so that it's like the guns are heavy and the physics move. Like when you clip somebody in Call of Duty, it's 1, 2, 3 dead and they don't move. In Killzone 2, when you hit like a Hellgast, which is the enemy's head, their head like shakes like or their arm shakes and you feel that hit back to you registered in the controller. Every single gun has a unique physical weight to it that you can feel in the controller. So like when you turn, it's like you're lifting a rifle. And that is like amazing, amazing. That's German engineering for you, because that's Guerrilla Games who made that, and then they made Killzone 3, Killzone Shadowfall, and then they went on to Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West, and then the guy who was the head of that studio, Herman Holst, he was the one who's now in charge of developing all of the games for Sony and their worldwide studios. So yeah, they're the best, and I was so deeply anticipating this game, and I've talked about before with other people how much I've saved up for the PlayStation 3 because I got a PlayStation 2 for Christmas, and that was like the biggest surprise. But it was like this is too expensive, for Santa. So I ended up saving to get it. And my brother had already had an Xbox 360 at the time, but I'm like, I want to play Killzone 2. Like nobody else cares about this, but I want to play this. So there was that, and there was a game coming out, Heavy Rain, which is basically Seven, but like where the serial killer drowns his victims in rainwater, and you play as like a detective and a father whose child goes missing, and then a like an FBI agent, and then a reporter, and they all track this serial killer. And that was like a really adult story with cool, like unbelievably realistic graphics. So those were like the two games that made me want to get my PlayStation 3. Uncharted was like an afterthought of like, yeah, I'll get that when I can. That'll be fun. But I save up for the PlayStation 3 to play Killzone 2. And even though the campaign for that is only like 6 hours, I was not disappointed. I was like visually blown away. And then I was blown away again because like this was at the time of standard definition to high definition. So I would play it on my dad's big screen TV, the 50-inch TV, and I would play that on a big screen, but it was just a standard definition CRT TV, so it was big and the sound was good, but it was like kind of fuzzy. And then I would go upstairs and play it on like my 19-inch 720p component um, television, and it would look so shiny, and I was like amazed at it. So it's just like a beautiful, enchanting game. And I knew how expensive it was and how hard it was to make. And it was just kind of like that was one of the first major games that I had gotten for that system. I'd already played Uncharted 1, and that was fine and fun and dandy. That was that summer. But I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pay the full price, the full $49 at the time for Killzone 2, and I like played it, and it was just an appreciation at the end of it, watching the credits, which are super long, like because so many people worked on this game, and this was back then, games took 2 years to make, and this game took like four, but they worked on it, so it was just kind of like a deep appreciation for like gamesmanship. And my brother was like, "Oh, are you coming?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I I just want to see if you ever appreciate a movie so much, like maybe in the theater, you're like, I want to drink it all in. I want to listen to what score they had, because the score to those games is good and very weeping and powerful, really underrated aspect of that game. But if you ever see a movie in theaters that you really enjoy, probably alone, because if you're with somebody, you're like, okay, let's go as soon as the credits roll, unless it's a Marvel film. You're kind of like, I want to appreciate this deeper, and you stay till the end, just out of appreciation. That was me right there. And then, looking back, I flip flop on it. But it's like at the time and shortly thereafter, I'm like, yeah, I don't regret like, oh, I stayed in and played games too much that time because the enjoyment of them was so consistent. And then I still went out and, played a few rounds with them after, and that was like super fun. Um, you know, maybe if I was better at sports, I'd play. But you have to keep in mind, I'm the youngest of five. I am substantially smaller, even at the time, than my sister. And all of them. And my brother would always bring his friends who are like giants and still kind of giants to me. Like in my family, my dad is 6 foot, my mom's like 5'2". So as you go down the levels in the family, I mean, I'm taller than my sister now, but I'm like 5'9". Um, and so it's like my brother is 6 foot. All of his friends are 6 foot. My other brother is like 5'11". Although he swears my oldest brother is actually 5'11" and is lying. Which get out the measuring sticks, people. Let's make it a stretch goal on Patreon. It's like $500 to find out Alex and Nick's actual height to compare against each other. Uh, I doubt Alex would want to compete. Maybe he'd have some excuse. He's like, well, I never said, but anyways. Um, yeah, so I never had a chance when I played sports with them. It was just playing with the family and the cousins and stuff and having fun. And yeah, I don't feel like I got too little of it because I stayed in and played video games. It was just, I remember at the time, one time I went to a party and my buddy Marty had Bioshock 2 and Halo 3 ODST. And I wanted to play. He just had a room. His parents didn't care. He had a room that had a giant amp and I could watch it. It was like sitting in the theater, but you were close up to the screen and playing the opening to Halo 3 ODST with the saxophone by Marty O'Donnell. It's like, like I listen to that on Spotify. Sometimes it's very relaxing background, like rainy mood music. And it's like, do I regret it? No. But, the people who tell you those warning stories, they weren't as fortunate as me or some of you listeners to grow up in the golden age of gaming. I can't believe that it's like my prime years of gaming were in the golden age of gaming of like 7th gen, where the graphics were like HD for the first time, but there was enough of a supply of games and they didn't take 4 years to develop, and they weren't on number 4 and 5, and there weren't all these microtransactions. It was just like single player game, single player game, single player game. And then you had like two or three huge shooters like Call of Duty at its peak coming out. So like I was playing during that era. So if you're an adult and you're like, I stayed in all the time, played video games, it's like, yeah, if you're playing like 8-bit Aladdin, you know, and not going outside when everybody is outside, you know, then you're gonna regret it. But if you're playing like gaming masterpieces day after day, and like if you go outside, you'll get your ass kicked in sports, um, and it will still be there when you're there after, then you probably don't regret it as much. So yeah, I'm wistful, I guess, for that time, but I wouldn't want to go back to it, and nor would I, as I'm thinking for the next generation of kids growing up, would I introduce them to games? Probably not, because there's just like microtransactions and Fortnite skins, which are references to like superheroes, which are still fun, and the quality of games are better, even better than when I was growing up, but there isn't the diversity of experiences and the level of art direction and thought into like kids games and stuff, or teenage games they were growing up. So what, I'll let this generation of kids like discover games on their own, unless they play with me as my nephew does, and we play the Nintendo games, and that's fun. But yeah, no regrets there. um, and yeah, they're the best. And short experiences like Killzone that where they're only like 6 hours long compared to another game are underrated because people complain about quality. But Casablanca, again, 106 minutes. Ben Hur is 3 hours. Is Ben Hur a better Best Picture winner? You know, it won more Academy Awards. Casablanca only won for Best Picture and Script. And somebody hilariously said on Twitter, Tone Deaf was like, "Who can like?" It was some celebrity being interviewed, and they're like, "Nobody can remember who directed Casablanca," and it's not a famous name, but I was just like, Michael Curtis," and I looked it up, and yeah, that was true. It won Best Picture. It was nominated in Best Actor for Humphrey Bogart, which is like his most famous role. You also had Claude Rains, like that's a memorable name, and Michael Curtis won for Best Director. Um, and yeah, did he do anything like super famous afterwards? He did do Mildred Pierce, which has been remade into an HBO series and a bunch of other stuff, and that won, you know, an Oscar for Joan Crawford. But like, yeah, it won for screenplay, which Howard Koch wrote with Julius Epstein and Philip Epstein. But yeah, it's a like it's a good it's an appreciative movie. I remember watching it at the time and being like, oh well, at least it's short because like all the other movies were long and big and grand. You know, Ben Hur, Lawrence of Arabia, Gone with the Wind, and then here's Casablanca sitting as like one of the greatest films of all time. The Godfather is another, part one and two. They're all 3 hours. There's something to be said about expediency, and that's why Casablanca ranks above all of them. And then you get to something more modern, like Parasite, which I will say, as my number 23 pick, that movie, when watching it, you're like, it's pure cinema because every aspect of this movie is thought of. The themes, like it's very thematical, but everything people say, you know, sometimes you have characters who in a movie like they'll it feels like they're going out of the way to say something they wouldn't normally say so that the movie can progress or they're doing it but the movie's like cheeky. In Parasite, everything everybody says like makes sense for their character and their characters are well drawn, and in the maze of which these characters are in, the plot moves well. I have an issue with the predictability of it in the second half, the part like the literal turning the point of the movie, and you can tell. And but there are so many grand shots. There's a grand montage. The music is good. The production design is good. The editing is good. Although I will say that like my problem with the movie is that like you really have to get over that hump of like the first half of that movie in order to enjoy it, and that's like an unpopular thing to say because people are like, oh, you know, it's like Korean people are finally being opened up to the eyes of like great foreign language cinema. It's like, yeah, but like people don't like conversing with movies in a language under in their own. That's not being snooty. That's just like wanting to understand the movie you're in. I mean, some people, in my opinion, go too far and they will watch English language movies with subtitles so that they can read the movie as they're watching it. Now, I get the sound mixing now is terrible because um, basically separate sound cards, how they get integrated into modern HD TVs. I can do a whole separate topic on this, but you get that in multiple standards, then mixed with we're seeing movies on VOD and we're seeing movies on streaming. Did you know that even though it's lower definition, if you take a DVD, the amount of information stored on it, even though it's at a lower rate of information, has a higher quality bit rate, that's megabits per second, than something on streaming does. If you watch something on Netflix, it goes at about the top speed of your internet of like 25 to 30 megabits per second. 30 megabits, which I think, by the way, is the Canadian standard, which thank God it's higher than America's because America's internet bit rate minimum is like 10, which is bullshit. Um, but, anyways, you take a regular DVD and it's why I'll sometimes watch something like on DVD, even if it's in high definition on like Netflix, because they mess with the coloring a lot. Saving Private Ryan is a good example of that. And then, sometimes you'll see it's like, oh, why is the explosions and action so loud and the dialogue so minimal? And that's because the bit rate, the compression, it's been compressed down to, 25 megabits per second data. If you watch something on a DVD, it's 40. Now, if you watch, the one positive and exception to this is on Apple TV that has a bit rate of about 45 compared to Netflix's 25. A DVD, I think, has about 40. If you go up to 4K, you're hitting like the 80s. And depending on how short the movie is, the shorter it is, the higher it can go. But like 120 bit rates, like think like 120 bytes at something versus like 80 versus 40 or something. And you're like, oh, how can it stretch? I mean, AI and computers, like, they do a lot of the work now and they're doing more now. But like, yeah, the quality of a movie is, uh, I don't know, impressive. But yeah, that's why I watch stuff on DVD. And it's just a bummer now with audio that it's like the mixing is all over the place and people don't enjoy it. So that's why I would say that people are apprehensive about foreign movies. Um, Although, how does that explain the generation before? I would say that because of the social media era that we're more divided than ever, we're also more connected than ever. So there's an ability to see, movies that 20 years ago couldn't have been made because you couldn't have, the UK making a German film in an entirely foreign language and having it, be in high definition and pay attention to every little detail and then go online and have people talk about, well, this is a reference to this movie. And I don't get this movie. What happened? Here's the ending explained. And that movie would be like the zone of interest. That movie couldn't be made. Today it's Best Picture, but it's not like forced on anyone. It's Best Picture because somebody saw it and was able to communicate how good it was, and then communicate to 1,000 other people how good it was. And then we were able to see it and talk about it. That's a foreign language movie nominated for Best Picture. And then you have Anatomy of a Fall, a movie that is also foreign language, but like literally done with a stopwatch because the Academy rules, which it didn't end up getting nominated for the foreign language or international film category, which Parasite, by the way, was the first to win when it was renamed. They had a stopwatch making Anatomy of a Fall where they're basically like, okay, this has to be 51% foreign language. It can only be 49% English. And then that changes too, even after you filmed it, even after in the script by how you edit it. So, somebody at Vanity Fair, the Little Gold Men podcast I listen to, it's like somebody was literally editing that with like a stopwatch to make sure. But you have a movie that's like partly in French, ends up winning Best Picture. Last year, you have Triangle of Sadness, you know, that was nominated for Best Picture. And these are foreign language movies that, like, you or I, I'm not big into foreign language movies, but if they're so good, then let's watch them. And Parasite is kind of the breakthrough in that. You can go back further and say, well, Old Boy did that with the DVDs, and that's true. But it's like Old Boy opened up the niche. Old Boy walked so that Parasite could run, and now Old Boy is being remade into a TV series by the person who made the original movie, even though they kind of didn't learn from the Spike Lee movie, which got chopped up. It's like, I'm sure it'll be like a full season for them to get up to the point of like, and now I'm gonna be Old Boy. But yeah, Parasite is like both a subtle and grand movie that like you have to basically get to the first like hour and 5 minutes before the movie kind of catches momentum, in my opinion. So I really enjoy it. You can, if you watch it a second time, which I haven't done, I've seen clips and like when I watch it on TV and I catch it on Crave and stuff, I still have cable. And it's like, oh yeah, this scene I want to see. Oh, I want to see them sneak out, or I want to see them, party it up and have a good time, or I want to see the climax, the bloody climax. And I think, just one of the ways where you think one character is going to suffer and the other character does, and it seems kind of random. That kind of bothered me a bit. I won't get into spoilers about it. I guess because I respect the movie so much. Or on the other hand, what if I don't respect the movie and I'll just tell you now because you know, spoiler alert beginning for Parasite. The daughter dies randomly. The halfway through this movie, um, they discover the core of the house is literally rotten because somebody has been staying in the basement. These parasites, you might say. And they realized that it was the old maid all along who was like basically feeding her husband, who was like chained to the radiator. Um, I haven't seen it in a while, but like there's a moment in the halfway point of this movie where it's soaking wet raining and the family who has conned their way into this rich person's house, all getting jobs working as their chauffeur and their maid and their tutor. Um, and they see while they're all partying, like that this maid who was recently fired, who they got fired, is asking to, she forgot some things, can they let her in? And it's so obvious that no, they shouldn't let him in. But it's like the idea is they can't help themselves. And it's such an obvious bad idea in like a horror movie that it kind of like soured me a bit on the film, that even though you go in and then you discover, you know, that the person is living underneath and then it threatens this family's existence, that they like got to take care of it somehow. Um, it all makes sense because like they're parasites feeding off this rich people. These rich people can't live for themselves. They're parasites getting poor people to do their work. Upstairs, downstairs, as they call it. Very, you know, thematic stuff. It all fits architecturally, visually, editorially, auditorially together in a way that people would say, yeah, it's one of the best movies of the century. It's one of the best movies ever to win Best Picture. And watching it, you get that reward. But like, I was turned off by it. Took a little while to get going, which I understand for like the big swing it's going for and pulls off. But at the same time, I was like, this feels like it's taking too long. The subtitles, they didn't bother me because the way the Korean language from South Korea is where the movie is from translates to certain languages. I don't mind watching in subtitles. I always prefer watching in subtitles. I can't stand dubbing, but Korean is one of them that's good to watch in subtitles because it's like hey, like they're very short to the point, and many of the directors that have broken through are action oriented. So when you have to read a line of dialogue, it is a line of dialogue. Dialogue. It's not in German or Russian or any of the non-romantic languages. Sorry, I don't know what actually is a romantic language. I just go by what sounds nice. And like Spanish sounds nice, but they talk a lot. Korean flows very nicely, and you don't have to read a lot. It's like short phrases and sentences. It's kind of a simple language. There's even a guy on TikTok who said that you can like, I'm going to teach you Korean, and he taught me like the alphabet, which I've obviously totally forgotten. And then, you know, afterwards his episodes fell out of the algorithm, so I really haven't seen you know, anything beyond how to pronounce Samsung or Hyundai. And it was funny because that guy was like a southern hick and whatnot. But yeah, anyways, it seemed like a nice guy, pretty good teacher too. But yeah, this movie I gave 3 stars and I liked it. I don't use the liking on Letterbox because it's like, I don't know. It's a good way of being like, this movie, you know, I appreciate the craft, but I also like it. So yeah. Um, yeah. Uh, the top review of this movie says another bong hit, because the director's name is Bong Joon Ho, or how it's pronounced, Pong Joon Ho. So that's kind of fascinating. Um, yeah, my review was that a true cinematic exercise, a bit to get over the first act hump, but it's worth it. So, yeah, Parasite, it is worth watching. It's one of those, you like my mom, I believe, when watching it, is like, well, you know, I'm glad I watched it, you know. It's rewarding in that sense. But 22 is kind of like the opposite because it's like an English language movie, as most of them are. And it's not even visually a super strong movie. It is just basically kind of all screenplay, procedural. It's Spotlight, the movie about the uncovering of sexual predators in the Catholic Church in Boston, and the team at the Boston Globe who uncovered it, the five reporters and many other people who worked on it to uncover just the seedy underbelly of what was going on here. I remember being so surprised because this movie, directed by Tom McCarthy, isn't it's not flashy in any way. He directed The Visitor, which I watched. That was okay. It's about a guy who comes home and finds out that people have been squatting in his home, and it's like another nice slice of life drama, win win, with Paul Giamatti about this guy who fosters a kid, and he ends up being on the wrestling team. Bobby Cannavale is in it. Bobby Cannavale is also in The Station Agent, the movie of his that I like most, which is literally Peter Dinklage. Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones comes to this small town to be the station agent for trains and just count trains. And he connects with Bobby Cannavale and this other woman who is Michelle Williams. And it's just kind of like one of those movies about life, which is the one oh, sorry, Patricia Clarkson. No, Michelle Williams is also in it. Yeah, blonde white women look alike, I guess. But yeah, it's a movie I enjoyed, and a slice of life, kind of better than Spotlight, even though Spotlight's like bigger. And the thing that I like most about it, and you'll hear this sometimes about movies, is that it doesn't lionize the heroes of the movie, of like the people that uncovered the scandal in the Catholic Church. It it's like it kind of holds them to account, like just a little bit of like, hey, we missed this too. Like we wrote an article on it, a paragraph of a thing, and moved on to something else. We missed it. And so it's a lot of times what I see in movies is like the attitude of like, yeah, I'm better than you, or isn't this profession noble and stuff. It doesn't like go after the people who do, like take shortcuts and stuff. What this movie examines is when anything great is uncovered that requires a huge undertaking, it takes a team of people doing different things to collaborate in order to get it done and achieve something. Like if you think about a few years ago, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, how like everybody did that. Even I was challenged, and the annoying thing was that like I did it, and then I uploaded it on my old computer, and I got like uploaded it to the YouTube page, and then I uploaded it, it froze, and I'm like, okay, well that's not getting uploaded. So you never saw me do an ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. I did one of those like informational things because everybody was just doing the same thing, and I'm like, oh well, what if I have facts about the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge? So that's what I did. But it was amazing how that ended up raising like over $100 million. Like it was a social movement that like um is due for like a TikTok rerun of people being like, "Hey, remember this?" And then like people who like were around at the time being like, "I was around at the time." It's like, yeah, it was less than 10 years ago. Um Anyways, and it raised like over 115 million worldwide. It was, and every single person like joined in, and everybody had their moment. I remember like Tom Cruise did it on the set of like Mission Impossible 5. Him and Christopher McQuarrie did it, and The Rock did it, and then Bill Gates did it, where he like rigged his own bucket to go on his head, and it was like something where it's like so many people did this, and now we kind of know. So it was just kind of like a fascinating thing. Yeah, uh, the they it was originally called like in 2014 like the Cold Water challenge. So yeah, uh, the Chris Kennedy, it says, was the first golfer to do it. But like, and again, he's not somebody I know about, but it was kind of like one guy doing a thing, and it's just enough to make an impression on someone else, and then someone else takes it and runs with it, and then somebody else runs with it and turns around and does something different and builds on it. in Spotlight, every single character has like a different role. There's Mark Wahlberg or Mark Ruffalo, who overacts in it. His accent is also kind of like he adds a little bit of a twist to it, and I thought it was like weird. He like overdoes it in the movie. I hate his speech of like "It's time" and stuff. It felt too much like here's my Oscar moment. And then you have Rachel McAdams, who was nominated for it. Stanley Tucci in it, he's good. Smaller role. And then you have like even Billy Crudup and stuff. The two people who I like, well, I like John Slattery. Uh, so Donald Sterling from Mad Men, which I haven't watched enough of, by the way. I only watched like 5 episodes. I'll get to that on another subject. But he's good in the movie. Michael Keaton is good in the movie. And Liev Schreiber, my favorite role of his, Marty Baron. It's so like an under the radar kind of move. And the annoying thing is that it's such a subtle performance that like they didn't nominate it. Of course, they nominate Mark Ruffalo because he yells in it, and it's like still at the time they're like, oh, what were the women roles this year? Let's nominate that. It's like who's the one woman in the movie? Rachel McAdams. Yeah, she gets nominated. So it was kind of like that because again, the Academy cannot recognize subtle, particular in acting. They're the most egotistical group of people, the acting branch of the Academy, because most of them are actors who are acting in the industry. So they're like, oh, I want somebody to go big like it's like best acting is most acting, and so like the least subtle work. It's hard for people to like collectively recognize subtle work as better. So yeah, you know, I think Michael Keaton was great, and that was like his follow up. He wasn't in anything except Birdman. So Michael Keaton, like people don't remember this, but him and Tom Hanks were like competing in the 80s for like a bunch of roles as like the comedy guy, doing a bit of drama and stuff. And Bill Simmons of the Ringer Podcast Network posited it's like, yeah, for a while, like Tom Hanks was the biggest star in the world and still is technically by box office in the US. But as far as acting goes, um, and I know people want to say Tom Cruise and stuff, but Tom Hanks has actually had more $100 million movies in the U.S. than Tom Cruise. Although Tom Cruise worldwide takes it in a cakewalk and is still like a much bigger star. But Tom Hanks, that works for him. It's down to earth. I saw the end of Captain Phillips today. I'm like, yeah, that guy's a great actor. I physically I brought this up or might have mentioned it. I type wrote a letter to Tom Hanks last week telling him that him and Steven Spielberg should make a Red Dead Redemption movie adaptation. And it'd be perfect for both of them because Tom Hanks has done like a few westerns, but he does good work with Spielberg. And Spielberg has never done a western. That's like the one genre he hasn't touched. But like, how do you do one? And with the Red Dead games, which I think are overrated, honestly, a bit in terms of story, they're fun, but they're not Rockstar. Grand Theft Auto is best games. Like, even I like Max Payne 3 better than I like the Red Dead Redemption games, but they're nice to look at. And the production value is to be commended. But if they did a movie, I would have Tom Hanks play the bad guy, Dutch Vanderland. And he looks basically like Tom Hanks does in The Lady Killers with the like, goatee, the big goatee, and like the mutton chop, and the kind of like Southern KFC Colonel Sanders tie and stuff like that. Like, I can see him or his character from Cloud Atlas called Henry Goose, who was like a villain. I can see Tom Hanks kind of fiddling around with that character and either having him be the main guy because Dutch Vanderland is the most important character in that franchise who connects both John Marston and Arthur Morgan. So he could be there as the main guy, as he usually is with Spielberg, or he could be supporting like he was in Catch Me If You Can and have a Leonardo DiCaprio or somebody be in there. That would be a good one to bring Leo back because I'm sure Leo would like. He played video games. I doubt he played Red Dead Redemption because that's like too modern. But like I can see him joining in, and Tom Hanks joining in, and then I mean, you could imagine Tom Cruise joining in, but I don't think him and Spielberg will work together after War of the Worlds when Tom Cruise's Scientology kind of derailed that whole film's publicity tour, and they had a hard time making it because Paramount usually has a rule of like we don't allow Scientology signups or anything like that on set, but they made an exception for Tom Cruise because he was so big at the time. And then, of course, with Tom Cruise, what happened is that he achieved so much success that his head kind of got a bit too big, and he basically wanted to move on from his publicist and have more control, which he's eventually steered of. But in the meantime, he basically fired his publicist and then hired his sister, who was a bit more of a yes person, and then started talking Scientology in interviews, and his behavior basically really took away from the success of the movie, which ended up being still his biggest success, but it he ended up like getting Scientology people to go to like a doctor's office and pick it. And that doctor was like a friend of Spielberg. It was one of his guys. And like he gets a call from Spielberg of like, these Scientology people showed up. And you're like, that's Tom. I can't have Tom in my life anymore professionally because he's causing like such a headache to the people around me. And it's like, if you ever have a toxic friend, you just kind of there's a time when you got to like cut them off and say like I have no more reason to see this person, and that's what Spielberg has done. And the rumor is he said like he was furious, and even though Tom apologized, he'll never work with him again, which just kills me because like you can tell War of the Worlds is kind of like it feels like the tip of the iceberg of like where blockbuster movies could go with Spielberg. And after Spielberg cut him off from that. Like him and Cruise never worked together, and Spielberg didn't have a monster hit until he did Indiana Jones 4, and that was like a big hit, but people were disappointed by it. And then he hadn't done another blockbuster again. Lincoln Outside of Lincoln, which was just kind of like a lucky, very historical movie. So it ends up being a good hit, solid film all around. 172 million stuff does fantastically well. But he doesn't do another blockbuster again until Ready Player One. And it's just kind of, he ended up doing Ready Player One because he hadn't done a movie in a while, like a blockbuster. And that's why I appreciate that movie so much. And he, um, I wonder what he's going to do next. So I thought, like, well, I like his movies, but they're lacking. Like Ready Player One was lacking in the story department. So if he can find a way to meld that, and that's what I think he's been trying to do. He's been trying to put the atom back together, um, and that's why it's like Fablemans felt like it could have been a blockbuster and a drama, but it was marketed very poorly by Universal Pictures, which I have beef with. And then, Warner Brothers had a confusing campaign for, Ready Player One because they didn't know who to reach, and the circumstances were changing, and social media. And it's been something that, like, A24 and other companies have been able to hammer and hit on audiences for that major studios have struggled with because it's like, okay, well, I guess the only way we can reach them is throw out everything but the kitchen sink. Like Barbie had a record huge campaign by Warner Brothers. It was by far their most like expensive investment that year and paid off because it was the most successful movie of last year. And then you had Oppenheimer, which had $100 million production budget and $100 million marketing. And other than that, you had the Super Mario Brothers movie, which had a built-in audience because the video games had been around for so long, and it was marketed to kids from the makers of Despicable Me, so they know how to do that. But with Spielberg, I would say he hasn't lost it. People like to argue that he has. It's just that the stories that he wants to tell are more adult stories, which are kind of more boring, like The Post and stuff like that, than what people want to see. And he's still just as good as making them. But it's like he wanted to make West Side Story, and I thought, oh, great, that's kind of cool. Is it going to be? No, it's going to still take place in like the 60s and, be that. And it's like, well, I'd love to see like a modern day West Side Story where it's like, okay, who would it be? Would it be like white and black people? Because it's like we're all kind of more homogenized for our culture. So it'd be interesting to see a modern day movie, and Spielberg doesn't make that modern day movie because he's rustic, he likes that old timey period pieces, and it's something that people have expressed in the movie community and just outside of it. People who are just fans of movies are like, where are the modern day movies? Like, where are the modern day classics that were coming out in the 90s and the 2000s, like the action movies? Because here's what you get: you basically get the straight to video garbage, then you get the streaming garbage, and then you get the theatrical garbage by The Rock. And it's like every action movie has to be a dumb, fun action movie. Like, why does this plot logic make no sense? Why is the lighting bad? Why does the CGI look stupid? And then your coworker will be like, it's a turn your brain off movie. You're not supposed to think about it. And then Twitter will be like, why can't you just enjoy things? It's like, hey, if I wanted to enjoy things, I'd enjoy the C plus you got in geography. Okay? Sit down. Okay? Nobody asks your opinion. I like my movies done well, and I don't care what genre they're in. They all have to be the best. Okay? It has to be John Woo's Face Off every time if you're gonna like make an action movie. That's why I like Fast and Furious 6, because director Justin Lin was like, "Hey, let's uh we're gonna do this movie. Let's try and make this scene like the best, fight scene ever made." And that was where, Michelle Rodriguez tackles Gina Carano down the stairs, which in retrospect is very satisfying if you're annoyed by Gina Carano, who really worked overtime to get herself fired from Disney. Let me tell you. And now she's kind of this pariah who's like turned into some far right idiot. What a shame, because she started off with, Haywire, Steven Soderbergh movie. That's a cool movie, just like straight meat and potatoes. It's not amazing, but it's like an enjoyable movie. And then she was in Fast and Furious. Then she kind of settled into this niche and was doing Star Wars, showing up as a character. And then she had to like comment and share on a story of like, well, did the Holocaust, Jews, did that happen? And then she like uh, apologized to that. And then a couple of time goes by, and then she's like, said some stuff about trans people. And then Pedro Pascal, who's the lead on this, was like going and telling her, it's like, just make one status up, like apologize. And she said no. And he's like, okay, well, make one status update. That's just like translates heart emoji. I don't care what it is. If you do that, all of this will go away. And she wouldn't do it. And it's just kind of like stubborn, rich, want to say what you want. You want the freedom. And it like jeopardizes your career. And then, people get mad. It's like, why am I not being hired? It's like, well, because you can't work with certain groups of people who are the important people that audiences and movie studios want to work with. Like, I had this thought earlier today of like, people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the guy who wrote Glengarry Glen Ross, the very respected David Mamet, wrote that movie and wrote the original play that it's based on. He's known for like dialogue, but he's like the whitest white man that there is. And by that I mean like all of his movies are like, and I take that back actually in terms of like whitest white man. That doesn't mean anything. Um, I should just say that his dialogue is like misogynistic, and I've never really gotten why he's so like appreciated and thought of. Probably because at its core, Glengarry Glen Ross is a very good portrait of masculinity and fragile men and men trying to be macho to cover up their insecurities. That makes people think that he has a deeper thought to it. But maybe he was just like a guy with Tourette's, and that like spilled out onto it, and he rolled with it because the language in that, my golly. There's a really fun fake trailer about Glengarry Glen Ross. It's called Glenn and Gary and Glenn and Ross, and it's like Alec Baldwin comes in to teach these men to speak because they have Tourette's because they can't stop swearing. So yeah, one of the early YouTube viral videos. That's hilarious. But yeah, was complaining about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Meanwhile, he has like 3 or 4 like kids that are in the industry. Like one of them was on Girls, and they're in they get good work. And he was asked about nepotism. And he's like, it's bullshit. All of my kids, they never got a job that they didn't deserve on merit. It's like, well, if they did nothing before there and then they're on a major TV show, obviously it's a leg up because it's like you have connections and you can say, well, you can ask so and so and you'll go to more auditions and you'll go to the right people's auditions the right time. You're not like going down to Belleville to see, well, maybe this might be a job or something like that. And then, yeah, as Ryan Gosling said, it's like you go there, you discover that there's 10 or 12 other people. They remember to get the hat. You go in, you do it. Somebody's on their computer. The other guy's eating lunch. You go in, you get halfway. They say stop. And they're like, thank you. And they're like, I could do it, another way. They have people to get through. They shove you through. You go back. You realize that you got a parking ticket because you were waiting too long. And, that's the run up. Nepotism babies don't have that. They're like, oh, go see Uncle Ben. I don't want to. I don't want to drag on Spielberg. He's not really a nepotism baby. He's not. But he did have an uncle who worked on the lot at Universal Pictures that was able to let him be in the know of like, hey, they're hiring at Universal. So that's where he was able to get his internship. And fortunately, like, he is brilliant. And there are many people who are like, people say Nepo babies. It's a bit too cute of a phrase. But like Jamie Lee Curtis, her mother is the lead of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Janet Leigh. And that's an iconic role. And then Tony Curtis is in Some Like It Hot and in many other like very well received movies. I mentioned that on the last part about how well edited Some Like It Hot is, and he was a famous person. They were both, or one of them was Tony Curtis was nominated for Best Actor and never won. Jamie Lee Curtis has been in her fair share of movies. She's an industry champion. And I like her. I guess I liked her ever since the Freaky Friday. Oh my God, I'm the Crypt Keeper. I saw the other day she and Jodie Foster were at the Chinese theater putting their Jodie Foster was putting her hands in like cement and stuff, and I found out that they're friends. And funny enough, Jodie Foster was the daughter in the original '80s Disney version, which might have been a TV movie of Freaky Friday. Jamie Lee Curtis was the mother in the Lindsay Lohan, of course, Freaky Friday, and they're like, oh, we need to do like a sequel or something. It's like, how's this for a sequel? What if they like you really mix it up and Jodie Foster is the daughter now and Jamie Lee Curtis is like the mother now, and they're like mixed together, and there's like, I don't know if there's like a time warp or you add because you need Lindsay Lohan back and stuff. So like you multiverse the thing, okay, like Spider-Man No Way Home or Across the Spider-Verse or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's why it's cool. So, long story short, Jamie Lee Curtis left an impression on me. And last year she won, Best Supporting Actress or 2 years ago now, Best Supporting Actress for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Actually, that's just a year and some ago. We'll split the difference. Anyway, she won Best Supporting Actress, and her parents never won that. So, in many ways, she is like has had a superior career to her parents. Would I call her a nepotism baby? It's like, well, yes, technically they did have the leg up. But to me, the meaning or the spirit of the phrase nepotism baby is about people who are sucking at the teat of like society and benefiting from it. But they're like babies who kind of contribute nothing of their own. They contribute no value of their own. Jamie Lee Curtis contributes value of her own. She's arguably better at her job than her parents were. So she gets accused of being a Nepo baby, which she is technically, but like I wouldn't call somebody who is just as good or better than their parents a Nepo baby. Like Wyatt Russell, who's Kurt Russell's son, he's playing, the younger version of Kurt on the Godzilla show Monarch, which surprisingly boring, despite being a Godzilla TV show with like the full budget and stuff. So disappointing in that. But if you watch Overlord, which is like a J.J. Abrams Cloverfield adjacent type movie, Wyatt Russell is great in that movie. If you watch his few episodes in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he plays like a legitimately conflicting character that I empathize with, much more than the villain who's like a straight up terrorist that they try and sympathize with because she's BIPOC. Um, Drives me nuts. But my point is that like Wyatt has value. Jamie Lee Curtis has value. Scott Eastwood, not so much, you know, but I'll allow it. I guess, you take the good with the bad. So yeah, it's, people get a leg up all the time because they have connections that other people don't. Um, but the point of it is that like people can still work their fair share even if they're successful, and people shouldn't like settle for less or like just be happy in their entertainment. It needs to be great every time, and us backsliding and just being like, well, let's just let The Rock do his thing. It's like, well, I'll let The Rock do his thing if he's like the best person for the job, but I'm not going to not point out obvious flaws that could have been made in this movie that could have been fixed. So yeah, I like it when movies kind of go hard and don't give themselves the break, and that's why I like Spotlight, because it goes pretty hard, despite being from like a soft director who's not like a visual masterpiece guy or anything. So yeah, and it was surprising because that movie only won for its screenplay and Best Picture and didn't win any other like Academy Awards. It's like one of the few, aside I think The Greatest Show on Earth, um, was the only other movie from like the 50s, which I have on DVD actually behind me here, um, and was given to Cecil B. DeMille because people felt bad for him because he hadn't like gotten the big one. They wanted to like reward him, and it's considered like one of the worst Academy Award winners, which is nice because Spielberg featured it as the movie that inspired him in The Fablemans. But yeah, that movie won Best Picture and Best Writing Motion Picture Story. Yes, they used to give out Academy Awards for Best Story, which is kind of like basically what they do for screenplay now. They're like, screenplay, what's that? F that, I want the movie that's the most original, forget dialogue. And that's why you get like a lot of the winners, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is like, oh, what if somebody was from different universes? Isn't that wacky? Or, Promising Young Woman. What if a woman was like, had a tragic, was sexually assaulted, but then went after the men and it was edgy, you know? It's like, that's what they're awarding. Or they're using it as like a backstop for like, we're not going to give you the big award, but we'll give you that. Like, Get Out has a great screenplay for sure, but it's for sure better directed than it is written. Like, that is a movie that is elevated by its direction. What did they do? They give Jordan Peele the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay rather than giving him Best Director, which he should have won. And yeah, that's just um, how it is. Um, we're as a backstop. So like, Spotlight is kind of one of the few in that category that basically does have a pretty good screenplay and carefully treads, and it does it well. And by the way, that year they gave it to Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water, which I mentioned before. I like that movie, but it's not as well directed as Pan's Labyrinth. Guillermo del Toro likes making these incredible worlds to live in, but the stories that he decides to tell while you're there are not the most exciting stories that could be spent in that world. But they were kind of like, this is a pretty good movie. Let's give it, and in looking at the competition, Paul Thomas Anderson, Phantom Thread, Paul Thomas doing his thing. Is it as good as There Will Be Blood? No. But the Coen brothers came out with No Country for Old Men that year, so he didn't end up getting it. Will he do a movie as satisfying as that? Well, he did do The Master, which is like interesting. But that movie got completely shut out, and that was either the year that Gravity won or uh, Alfonso Cuarón or Ang Lee won for A Life of Pi, which they could have they could have moved some mountains around there, but like nonetheless, um, that's uh, and it was the movie of 2012, by the way. So that was Life of Pi. He really they really could have given it um, to Paul Thomas Anderson for that year, because I watched Beasts of the Southern Lion, which Bene Zeitlin um, Bene Zeitlin was nominated for, and that movie was a struggle to get through. And like Spielberg was nominated for Lincoln, good to him. David O. Russell, Silver Linings Playbook, that movie is a trippy tightrope tonally. A lot of people have issues because it's like, oh, well, what if physical chemistry helped balance out somebody's craziness and your crazy matches my crazy and stuff like that? That's like a romantic idea that's like complete bullshit in the realm of like psychiatry and stuff, which is bullshit as well. But the although therapy is good, therapy is a must, especially if you're going through a time. It's important to have somebody to talk to and that kind of thing. No diss on therapy, but like I understand people not liking that movie. Amour, Michael Haneke. That movie was a struggle to get through. Every shot in that movie, most average shot is like 2.5 to 5 seconds in a movie now. Um, every shot in Amour is 45 seconds long, and it's about old people walking around in their apartment. It makes a hell of a statement, wrenching, as Michael Haneke is, so he deserves to be there. But yeah, they could have nominated Paul Thomas Anderson. Um, uh, but he didn't win that year because Phantom Thread wasn't the greatest. Greta Gerwig nominated for Lady Bird. Um, yeah, I, I, I get it. It's a pretty good debut, pretty strong all rounder, but yeah, not the best. And then Christopher Nolan, he did the World War II movie. Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not one of my faves. Sorry, my video just stopped. Um, yeah. Yeah, I'm just annoyed just because Guillermo, I was happy that Guillermo del Toro won and, I like his stuff, but um, it's kind of like Jordan Peele was the one that year, but it's like, well, we can't give a guy best director on his first film. He needs to earn his keep. Fuck earning your keep. Okay, it's like the most bullshit thing. Did they do good? I don't care how they did it. Worry about it next year if they're still good or not. You know, give it to them now. This whole rookie has to earn their keep or their whatever, wait your turn bullshit. That's not what art is about. Art isn't about waiting your turn. It's about breaking the rules, taking a risk, you know? That's what it's about. But yeah, enough about Spotlight. Um, let's get back to the action. Number 21 is The Sting. I mentioned I didn't like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is essentially the follow-up to that. It stars Robert Redford and Paul Newman, and they hadn't worked together since that movie. They were the two biggest stars of the time, and George Roy Hill directed it. And I liked it. I remember my dad had it on DVD. It made a huge, colossal amount of money at the time. And it's kind of funny that it won Best Picture because, again, seeing those movies, by the way, the movie is rated like 115 of films of all time on IMDb. Spotlight is rated 217, which I think for that one is a bit of, you know, uh, recency bias. But The Sting, yeah, it surprises me because it's like it was entertaining for me. It's about a con artist who, goes up against another con artist, and a sting happens. It's pretty straightforward, but the writing, um, best original screenplay went to David S. Ward, and George Roy Hill won best director, and was a movie I saw and enjoyed as a kid, mainly because I'd seen part of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is so lauded, um, and Yeah. Amazingly, this writer is still alive. So why anybody doesn't hire this guy, I don't get it. He also wrote Sleepless in Seattle and Major League, in Major League Two, in addition to The Sting. He did write the screenplay for a movie in 2019 called I'll Find You. Um, uh, so uh, what surprises me, it stars Stellan Skarsgård, Stephen Dorff. Like, why can't they get better people for this movie? Like Adelaide Clemens. Oh, because it must be like an Australian movie. And again, um, Stellan Skarsgård, excellent. Connie Nielsen, okay. I guess it's the kick on Stephen Dorff because he's not a good actor, and he's not in good things like ever. Um, yeah, that's just it's just how he is. Yeah, but Adelaide Clemens, I always know her from the second Silent Hill movie, which I watched because I was such a fan, not because of that. But yeah, is that movie any good though? Because the fascinating thing, especially on Rotten Tomatoes, is like there are movies where it's like they show up, they get good reviews, and you've never heard of them. Like this movie got 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, fewer than 50 ratings. Um, is there's not a consensus for this movie. It's just an ideal diversion for those who like their cinematic escapism with heavy doses of music and love. Ah, that sounds nice. It's like the movie Queen and Country, which was like well reviewed. I remember looking up and I got my mom to watch it, and I'd been meaning to watch it for whatever, just because it like, oh, this looks like a well reviewed hidden gem. I'll watch it. My mom's like, yeah, it was fine. Um, but yeah, the plot of this movie, by the way, is that it's the 1930s and two young lovers, Robert, a Catholic opera singer, and Rachel, a Jewish violin virtuoso, dream of one day performing together at the legendary Carnegie Hall. When they're torn apart by the German invasion of Poland, Robert vows to find Rachel no matter what. So, wow. Does this mean that Stephen Dorff was in a good movie? Probably, because the audience rating is at 82%, which is higher than the critics' rating. Why did this movie, like, you ever wonder why do hidden gems exist? You know, like, this is from the Academy Award winning writer of The Sting, and obviously the guy has not lost it. He knows how to spin a yarn, okay? Um, so, yeah, this person directed The Prince and Me, not very well reviewed. She directed Material Girls. These are just, I'm naming the movies that I've heard the title of. And then she did this movie in 2019. But, you know, the other thing that she directed was Introducing Dorothy Dandridge, which I've heard of. And Lost in Yonkers is another one that she directed, well reviewed. Rambling Rose, uh, Real Genius. That's got to be the Val Kilmer movie, right? Yeah. Uh, yeah, see, I knew I recognized Martha Coolidge's name. Yeah, Valley Girl. Um, yeah. So, what's fascinating to me is like you got to look at in 2019 before COVID, a lot of movies were released. A lot of them. So there were so many that you could make a good movie and it could be under the radar. So let me just see here for I'll Find You, because I like finding movies that could be good. You know, this is something we'll find here. Now, was it even released in theaters? Is the question. And the thing is that it's not showing up here, which means that it did not have a theatrical release in the United States. If you're making a movie, you gotta go theatrical, because that's how you stick in. There's only like there's more. There can be up to like 350 or something, but like essentially 250 major movies release in theaters a year. So if you want your movie to be remembered, I don't care if it's at number one. If it goes to theaters, then it should do it. So yeah, it released February. Oh, so here's the deal. It did not release until February 2022, which, believe it or not, was over 2 years ago. Um, and the distributor isn't even listed. So if I go down to here, Collider, I'll find you trailer. The romance is blah, 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 blah. You go down to the Collider article, they have a super long thing. They don't mention, uh, they don't even mention that the writer is that. And so it went to video on demand on February 25th. Did anybody even comment like on the poorly photoshopped poster? Yeah, 3 different things. And wow, Stellan Skarsgård looking pasty. Um, but any comments on this article? No. You know why? Because the way that they do comments now on every single friggin' website is by, except for Deadline, which is awesome, is like some bullshit plugin which takes forever to load, and then you sign in, and then you have to give the commenter, which is a separate from the website, you have to give them um, a different uh, like sign in thing, and then every time you sign in, and this is for JoeBlow.com, you have to like re-sign in every month. And it's BS on Deadline.com. You can comment like anonymously. You can add your thing, and they are all moderated. Like they all have to be checked, but you can jump in right away. But nobody commented on this article, so the movie got like no social chatter. Of course, what I do like, and I can't go to it now because the stupid YouTube ads. Way to go. Because if I go here and look for, like, what are the YouTube comments on this movie, uh, what I like is that if you want positivity, you'll always go to the trailer for the movie, because especially if it's a movie you haven't heard of, it like the people who are commenting on it are people who like saw the movie and they're like, oh, I want to find the trailer for that. And then the top comment will always be the best movie ever made, or I went in, I wasn't expecting much. But yeah, there's only 3 comments on this. One says Molt Maka Heart. The other one says, why give away the whole movie in the trailer? And then the third one is spoiler alert, which I won't say. I won't say because I want people to to like it. You know, yeah. So funny. I've given away the ending to so many things. Uh, I've given away the ending to so many movies, but it's like, yeah, I'll find you a movie which nobody found, which wasn't released until 2022, didn't get a theatrical release. I'm enjoying this. See, this is why I love movies. And again, I'm gonna recommend to my mom because it's like, hey, it's romance, it's wartime, right up your alley. So what I'm gonna do here, if I haven't deleted the bookmark, which for some reason I have, well, that sucks. I mean, I know I use different browsers and stuff, but like, why is this so complicated? I go to justwatch.com. This is where you can plug in all of your streaming services and stuff, and it can tell you what something is available on. And I'll type this in here. I'll find you, movie 2022, because they go by the American release. And of course, it's streaming on Hoopla, because that's where Queen and Country were on. So I'm going to add it to my Hoopla. And yeah, that'll be one to tell my mom about. I'll just add it to this episode at the top. Who cares? I'll find you. 2022. Man, see, we're discovering things on this podcast. And all of that because of the Sting. Great work lasts. Thank you, David Ward. Yeah. So, hey, if you want to go deeper, we can say that because my dad had The Sting on DVD and I watched it when I was 12, so I was able to add it to my Letterboxd account, is the reason that I'm telling you about this movie now, which means that because my dad bought it on DVD is the reason I'm telling you about this entirely movie now, you know, 20 years after I watched it. Wow. Wow. Makes you think how big the world is, eh? You know? Yeah. My dad, I believe he saw The Sting in theaters too when he was young. Um, it's a watchable movie, especially for its time, which, by the way, was 1974 when it won Best Picture, so it's like 1973. But I don't really like movies before 1975, and the reason for that is a technical one. In 1975, when Rocky came out, it basically invented the Steadicam, which is where you do the shoulder mounted cam, which isn't like super shaky. Um, Cameras got portable enough that people could carry them, so camera setups were a lot easier. Any movie before 1974, it's stilted, it's stiff. Everything's mostly in a wide shot. There's no inventive, in your face kind of camera moves, which can be too showy, and you see them all in student films now. But movies before 1975, unless it was brilliant, like, Psycho or something, you're not going to be impressed. You're not going to be brought into the world as easily. And the sound isn't as good as well. Although occasionally ones do get remasters, but the Sting is high enough stakes and fast enough and interesting characters, the world of con artists and stuff, that I was there to play around and I was in on it. So thank you, George Roy Hill and David Ward, for making a movie about two grifters who team up to pull off the ultimate con. Yeah, so moving down the line now, we are getting to number 20, which is a recent Best Picture winner, Coda. Now, Coda has a really great story idea, which is, what if a Coda, a child of deaf adults, was the most brilliant singer in her town, and her parents couldn't hear her. And because she has to translate for them, she does all this stuff for them, but they can't understand her true gifts, even though they love her. Like, what a brilliant story of, like, what if, the best singer couldn't be heard by those who loved her. Great, great send up. And it's a solid film. It's basically a TV movie. And Apple spent like the right amount of money, which was like, they spent like 25 million to acquire this like $5 million movie for one. They spent all that money, and then they greased the right amount of palms to have become the first streaming movie, because it's an Apple TV film, to win Best Picture. And of course, because capitalism destroys everything. The movie, which won Best Picture, does not have a physical release. It's a remake of a French film, which I guess it improves on, La Famille or La Famille Bélier. But and the director and screenwriter is Sean Heder, or Sean Heder. It's spelled Sian, Sian. What the heck does that, like? What's the background of that? Because she was born in Boston, so it's Welsh. There you go. So what is she doing next? Literally nothing. I don't see anything here. There's a joke because the one thing that she did afterwards was on the TV show Barry, she plays herself, and she's like, I directed the movie that won Best Picture, so she's an Academy Award winner, because she won, I believe, was it for a screenplay? Yes, for her adapted screenplay. Again, another director winning for writing their own screenplay rather than getting like a screenwriter and collaborating. But the last thing she did was her TV show for Apple called Little America, and the next thing that she's coming out with is a movie called Impossible, which is about a guy who's a ghostwriter. A disappointment for him and his soon-to-be ex-wife, and there's a woman named B, a commitment phobe, content on repurposing wedding dresses rather than finding a reason to wear one herself. And I suppose they meet, and the title or working title is Impossible. So, yeah. Wow, the storage is full on my video thing. So this is what I'm going to do here. Let's see if I can do this. I am going to have to work really hard to shove this thing out of here. Click. Yeah, I hate that snapping sound. I mean, it keeps it into place, but it pinches my fingers all the time. Okay, do I have enough space on this? Probably not, but I am going to record it anyway. Okay, so what about Coda? It's a pretty good movie. It doesn't visually distinguish itself pretty much at all. It falls under the TV movie category, which, if you ever think it's hard to win Best Picture, watch one of these movies, and it doesn't look so hard because it's like they just filmed a good script, but there's a lot of hidden stuff, a lot of movie magic that happens, and I don't even mean the technical magic. I just mean movies where like that have a heart and soul to them, that it really tug at your heartstrings. Certain directors, Sean Levy, who's actually doing Deadpool, um, he's a Canadian, by the way. He's doing Deadpool 3. He's very good at heartstrings, believe it or not, and it's why um, Ryan Reynolds waited for Free Guy to be developed, um, because he wanted, you know, the the movie to have heart and soul, and he wanted his movie to be a success. So Ryan Reynolds cares just enough about movies to make movies that have heart, but not enough to make good movies often. um, anyway, um, I've pretty much set this up now. It's pretty cool. I love this phone, Samsung Galaxy A10e. I got it super discounted, like for less than $100, and it has like a really, really crappy um, central processor. But as we established with the PlayStation 3, if you have muscle and just a little bit of thought, the right amount of thought, then you can achieve a lot. And That's really what the lesson in Coda's success should be, is that if you just um, charm the right person with deep pockets, in this case Tim Cook, you can achieve a lot, even though your business model for your movie makes no sense, because you don't pay for Coda, you pay for Apple TV, which you get because you bought an iPhone. In fact, not you bought an iPhone, but some relative or friend of yours bought an iPhone and got the Apple TV for a year and is so rich that they continue to pay for it. Thank you, brother Sam. Yeah, so COVID, feel good, or Coda. Coda is a feel good movie, likable enough. The one thing I'll say is that the parents in it are too wacky and kind of a-holes. Okay? Like, they lean on their child entirely to essentially live their life. They're like fishermen because it takes place in Massachusetts, I believe. And yeah, Gloucester. And like, they depend on this girl in order to like do their job. Like, they don't have a translator or anything. So he like goes out on the sea, and it's like, so the daughter just has to be there all the time, and he can't like operate as a boat as a fisherman because he's deaf unless she's there, or they find out that he can. And meanwhile, her and the Marley Matlin, who plays his her mom, uh, basically have to like they go on heavily in this movie about the parents' sex life, and try and make the parents like wacky in kind of like a funny way, but it's just kind of like creepy. And it's just kind of like they want you to see that deaf people are people too, but then they make them like super wacky, which, if you accept them as real people, then it's like gross that these parents would so freely and willingly involve their kid in their like sex life because she has to go to their doctor's office and translate, which is ridiculous because Marley Matlin, who Academy Award winner, by the way, um, has to like, in real life she has a translator, like she can read lips and understand, but this guy is effing deaf, the dad. It's just like, these people are like stupid. Like, so the movie doesn't really get around that, but it does have the heartstrings aspect because you care about you really sympathize with the main girl's predicament, because you're like, how do I separate myself from my parents? And then essentially he's a good actor, but because he's like deaf, they gave him the Oscar, Troy Kotsur, Best Supporting Actor. He, how do I say? It, I don't want to say it's like a political thing, but it's like it felt like a politically correct win for supporting actor, and that's not it. Like that alone isn't enough. That's not why he won. I'm sure Apple paid a lot of money for them to win as many Oscars as possible. You're talking about $1 trillion company with a limitless bank account, so they can go to every single Academy Award party and do that. Man, I have a time clock on this on my other phone, by the way. I am almost 4 minutes in, and I have 21 minutes left. Can I lower the resolution, though, and like change that? No, I can't. It's not letting me. What if I zigzag a bit and do any of that? Is that gonna work? No. Okay. Well, when I run out, I run out. You know, there's only so much you can do, unless I get my webcam and start recording that way. Or I get the iPad. Oh my gosh, I've never used that. I even have no idea how I'm gonna send that video, but that's what I'll do afterwards. Anyways, Coda, good movie. Watch it once, never watch it again. It's probably a good movie to Netflix and chill to. Um, Although, it's one of those, I hate it when they do subtitles, uh, but they have to do it in this case for ASL. Number 19 is a very impressive movie because the number 19 is the very first movie ever to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. So it is a silent black and white movie called Wings. It was done in the 1920s, 1925, 1926. It is called Wings, and it is about um, this uh, people who fly airplanes in World War One, and a romantic story. It has the first man-on-man kiss, but I wouldn't call it gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that, Jerry Seinfeld style. No, but it's the which is like kind of like a meaningless superlative because it's like not romantic at all. It's just like a tragic thing. The thing that's weird about hetero masculinity is like you ever have somebody be so macho that they become gay because what's gayer than because what's more manly than liking men, It's like one of those things odd, because that's a thing that's mainly perpetuated by a male chauvinistic heteronormative society. It's just weird how gay it is. Anyway, I digress. Um, Wings is a good movie that holds up. It is nearly 100 years old now. Was started made 100 years ago. Yeah, and you wouldn't think that a movie like that would hold up. A movie from 1927, by the way. Clara Bow, which is, by the way, the title of Taylor Swift's one of her songs from the Tortured Poets Department, which just released on Friday. Okay album, by the way. It's strung together quite nicely, but none of the songs so far have any sticking power. But that won't matter because Universal, which is the biggest distributor of music in the world, is just going to hammer it on you a bunch. And, we'll see what she makes an album out of. But she has enough celebrities and stuff. It would have to be really bad for you to not notice. But, Adele had her latest album, and it didn't hit as hard as her previous albums, even though there was nothing wrong with it. So will that happen with Taylor Swift? Then she'll fade out, maybe, but also maybe not, because then she'll just re-release one of her Taylor's version albums and kick herself back. But it would be smart of her, as she's touring, to you kind of need the wows in the spotlight so that people don't get sick of you. Even an endless reinventor like herself can have issues with that, but um, I don't have an issue with Clara Bow, though, the song or this movie. This is a silent star who successfully made the transition to talkie. She has a very um, memorable, unique face that looks like somebody out of the 1920s, like the Depression era girl face. Um, and she's perfect for like a romantic lead, essentially. So again, the casting of this movie from 100 years ago, the other guys I haven't heard of, Charles Rogers and Richard Arlen. Um, I've never heard of them. But yeah, William Wellman directed this movie. It's American Silent with synchronized sound. So it was like one of the first, they basically like, it came up with the sounds later on and then synced it into the movie. And then also, had the music. Um, it says, due to the general public's apathy towards silent films, the film was quickly re released in 1928 with synchronized sound. While the sound version of the film has no audible dialogue, it was released with a synchronized musical score and special effects. Um, so it was released by Paramount Famous Lasky Corporation, which of course became Paramount Pictures, which tomorrow might be owned by an entirely different company and bought out. How sad. Because it's just over 100 years old. In fact, this movie, I'm pretty sure, is in the public domain now, so you could probably watch it on YouTube. I watched it on Paramount Plus. Um, and yeah, uh, Paramount Pictures started in 1912, so 111 years ago. So their 100-year anniversary was 2012. Um, what was their big movie that year is what I'd like to know. Uh, let's find out. Because it wasn't the movie 2012, because that movie came out in 2009. So, I can't focus until I go to something else. Like, an answer comes up in my mind that's you can find out. But yeah, they were fighting the mother and daughter Sumner Redstone. He was the one, by the way, who fired Tom Cruise after War of the Worlds because he thought his behavior damaged ticket sales. Really, he was more upset about the giant share Tom Cruise got of the Mission Impossible DVDs. That's probably the fact. And they eventually made up. But eventually, him doing that and then having a big infighting with his daughter over Succession basically lost that company decades of progress, which is why they're being essentially swallowed up because their credit rating is in the crapper. So their big movies were Flight, the Denzel Washington vehicle, um, and that was kind of no way that that was their big movie that year. They had to have a bigger movie, and you know what? What I am seeing here is that they did not have a bigger movie. That shows you how terrible it is. The Town, another podcast I listened to, it's like, who are the worst executives? And I believe it was Brad Gray who was running Paramount at the time. I'll just double check my math here. The movie division. And they said that, like, he basically was so selfish and screwed over the entire company because he was a talent agent. Um, he died in 2017. He was the CEO from 2005 to 2017. And then afterwards, they got Jim Giannopoulos, who ran Fox, and took too long to like get them back into the number one position. So they fired him, and then right after they fired Jim Giannopoulos, every movie that was the Top Gun Maverick year, where it's like Sonic 2 came out, was a major hit. Sandra Bullock, The Lost City came out, was a major hit. Um, Smile came out, was a major hit. Scream came out, was a major hit. But they had just fired him, and then hired the guy who, I kid you not, directed Good Burger, um, and all of the terrible Eddie Murphy movies. And he is now the CEO of Paramount Pictures. But this guy, who was a talent agent, basically was really selfish, tanked the studio, and was essentially responsible for them screwing up, even though he d- distributed, Transformers and Paranormal Activity, and uh, they Paramount famously had um, Marvel in the palm of their hand and had the opportunity to buy Marvel, uh, and then they decided it wasn't for them. Keep in mind they had Iron Man had just come out, um, but they're like, "Ooh, I guess there's not much else to do." Um, but like he did well for like the first few years. Um, but basically they got out of the DreamWorks relationship that they have, which they should have kept in because Steven Spielberg's best movies, at least the ones that I like, were during the 2000 to 2005 era. Catch Me If You Can. Um, that was DreamWorks under Paramount, and then DreamWorks Animated during that time was also under Paramount. So like the Shrek movies, Madagascar, they've gone to like they were distributed by like Fox for a time, and then Universal. None of their movies that they have made since then, even though it's just a distributor, have had the impact that Paramount had under DreamWorks and under DreamWorks Animated. And DreamWorks Animated became so huge that it basically had to spin off from regular DreamWorks, and then they both ended up um, at Universal. DreamWorks, by the way, founded by Steven Spielberg. He set it up in between Jurassic Park 1 and 2 and spent many years of his life well spent for that movie. And uh, yeah, the SKG in DreamWorks, SKG stands for Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who used to run Disney for a time during like the golden age Aladdin, which he had them told the animators, no, you got to make Aladdin look more like Tom Cruise. So if you watch the animated Aladdin, you'll notice I can kind of see Tom Cruise there. He was the kind of guy who was into story and would give like story notes rather than notes about like animation of like, I don't understand why this happens. And he was like very hands on and pissed a lot of people off with how hands on he was. But yeah, after the 2010s, they, for whatever reason, had trouble forging the talent relationships. And it says that Gray was ultimately ousted by Paramount Pictures shortly before his death, a result of a power struggle between his backers and the family of Sumner Redstone, along with a series of flops that cost the studio $450 million in losses. But 100 years ago, you know, um, they had Clara Bow and they had Wings. And if you watch it today, you have the patience it like holds up because I'm like, is this going to be another, Lawrence of Arabia, another where I have to sit and, you know, think about it, the restoration. I'm not sure which version. I honestly am not. I think I might have seen the 111-minute version. There's a 144-minute version. Um, and I have to say, it's about rivals in a small American town, both vying for the intentions of one woman. Meanwhile, he fails to realize the girl next door, Mary, is desperately in love with him. This is classic cinema, and it's all communicated silently. Take it from me, this is like a silent black and white movie that is good, that holds up to somebody born in the 90s with like a short attention span, which you can tell going from my conversation. It is like the girl is girlying, like she's girly enough. She's the girl next door. You've seen probably the video. I mentioned how the Steadicam wasn't invented until 1995, so you couldn't easily move the camera unless you had it on a dolly track. This movie has the famous shot, which you've probably seen on Twitter because it's always used at the beginning of every beginning of cinema kind of thing, of the camera tracks inward, goes over the table, like in between people, down like 4 or 5 rows to get to like the center of the shot. It's like tracking inward across like 4 or 5 tables. And what they did was they basically constructed a set where they could take apart everything like in the middle to move the camera at like a pretty fast speed to get it. The movie cost 2 million, made 3 million, because back then people weren't, you know, things cost cents, not dollars. So yeah, it's amazing. I'm just happy that uh, a movie that's from nearly 100 years ago holds up. And clearly, if you're being referenced by Taylor Swift 100 years later, you're doing something right. So props to that. So yeah, Wings. This is a movie that I can see on Blu-ray. Is this gonna reset it? No, it's not. Okay. was that thing I had yesterday where it's like, am I going to press the button that resets the audio on the camera and video, or is it going to continue off because one's stop and one's record? But it's, sometimes recording sets a new record. So yeah, Wings, you can buy it on Blu-ray for 15.95. I'd say it's worth it having in a collection if I had a collection. My secret is that I only have like 18 movies that I actually own because, my dad always bought movies, my brothers bought movies and stuff, and then, we have access to streaming. So with that in mind, you don't really have the need to buy much. So yeah, Wings, worth watching, holds up, incredibly old movie. Now, this next movie is 20 years old, so not that old, and it's a surprisingly good movie. Chicago. It's a musical, the only musical that I like because I find that most of them, when adapted for film, they go on too long. They're front loaded. And so at the end, they've had all the good songs that you've done with. They just have reprisals, and it's like, when is this going to end? Oh, we have to do more sing song and blah, blah, blah. So they never get the amount of songs correct. Um, Chicago is not that. It's an amazing looking movie, an amazing costumed movie that's like well acted about, a female murderer who goes to like a female jail and has Richard Gere defend her and stuff. And it's like entertaining, like super razzle dazzle, fun time. And it's so weird to me that this movie won Best Picture in 2002, the year that Lord of the Rings Two Towers came out. Not that they were going to give it to that because Two Towers is a boring movie, which I have seen multiple times. But yeah, Chicago, it was like, oh, that movie, like, which came out and made like $180 million and was like a gigantic hit. Like, I remember uh, about it, like, people being like, oh, this movie's shit. Like, keep in mind, I was like 9 at the time. So, like, I only had, before the internet really took over because the forums weren't really active until like 2007 and stuff. So there was just like what your brother said, what somebody said at work to your dad that you don't remember and stuff like that. And I remember my brother saying like, "Oh, a friend of mine saw it and said it was good." And it's like, well, keep in mind this is like a if I was 10, like a 14, 15 year old like saw it and was like, it's this old timey set movie. And the movie, by the way, uh, is set like in I think the 40s. Um, Now I gotta find out. It's based on a play by Bob Fosse, um, uh, and it takes place in 1920s. So yeah, it's described as a contemporary, no, a musical black comedy crime film, which is based on the 1975 stage musical of the same name, which in turn originated in the 1926 play of the same name. Um, so Rob Marshall directed it, and he's done a lot of like he did Pirates of the Caribbean 4, and then he did 9, which by many accounts is not a good movie, although that didn't stop the Golden Globes from nominating it. Then he did Mary Poppins Returns. He did the uber terrible Little Mermaid live action film, a movie that I got 20 minutes into and is so much like the original. I'm like, okay, stop. Because it visually looks awful and there was like really no reason for it. If you're just going to do frame for frame the original movie but longer, don't bother. And then Bill Condon wrote it, who he started off his career directing Candyman 2, and then I know him as directing like Twilight Saga, Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2, and then the live action Beauty and the Beast remake. He received 2 nominations for Best Adapted Screenplay for Gods and Monsters, which he won for in Chicago, and then he also did Dreamgirls. So he kind of does live action Disney better than his director on Chicago, because he's done Beauty and the Beast, and Rob Marshall has done not that. And I didn't mind, even though it has a terrible last act. Like, I liked the buildup of The Good Liar, which was a movie he did um, with Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen, about people who kind of go on a blind date together. But it turns out that Ian McKellen is a con artist who wants to scam Helen Mirren out of millions of dollars. But he's also like a scam artist who murders people. Even though he's like an old man, he uses that to his advantage. And Helen Mirren, maybe there's a secret there. I don't know. Can you tell? Yes, probably, because there's not much going on in this movie, but that's not the point. It has a good two acts to it, and you're kind of in on it. And then it ends in like a physical fight between Ian McKellen and Helen Mirren, and you're just like, yeah, I I don't buy this. It's like clearly Bill Condon had this going on for a while, and then he's like, yeah, I don't know how to end it. So yeah, um, that's that's all I have to say about that. It's just that Bill Condon is better than Rob Marshall, um, in my opinion. Um, so let's get back on track here. I can put this at the end, and then Wings, and then Chicago is where we're at. Yeah, so Chicago, good movie. Um, watch it. It is worth watching. And it is a movie because I used to do another podcast called Watch and Complain. And I talked with the buddy Rob, who's like more of a nerd than me, which is saying something. And I talked to him about Chicago, and he was like, "Yeah, I like that movie. Like Queen Latifah was Oscar nominated for that movie. Like again, you bring this up to to people who you expect to hate it, and they're like, "Yeah, that movie is great," and it's just kind of like, "Oh, okay." Like, but the Bob Fosse stage musical is like excellent. The songs are good, so they had a really strong framework to work from. Number 17 is like kind of an emotional pick for me because I saw it at like the perfect time of like seeing an adult movie. It is the movie Ron Howard won Best Director for, and Akiva Goldsman, the screenwriter of Batman and Robin, uh, he won an Oscar for writing this. It's Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, which co-stars Jennifer Connelly, who got Best Supporting Actress for this. It's a brilliant mathematician, John Forbes Nash Jr., who comes up with his truly original idea of the Nash theorem, and at Princeton. Only it turns out that he is a schizophrenic and becomes a code breaker for the CIA. And he's, starts to imagine crazy, wonderful things. In real life, it's one of those movies like back when Hollywood was like could make big films but also didn't give a shit, so it like straight up makes up a whole lot of stuff that is wildly entertaining, but it also has nothing to do with the person they're talking about. And the best example of that is in the scene explaining Nash theorem, where Nash theorem is where everybody does what's best for themselves in the group, and then they just show a clip of them doing what's best for the group, which is not Nash theorem. I was actually shown this in game theory and university, and it's like great scene. It's nothing to do with Nash theorem. So yeah, entertaining movie. It's got some cool stuff in it. James Horner's score, which was used in the Rise of the Tomb Raider trailer, is dope. It's visually, I like it. The music is incredible. Really, it's like inspiring, like weirdly a dark feel good movie that you don't expect to be as dark as it is, but it's kind of like, well, okay, like let's let's go with this. It's kind of surprising that this one, um, like that this one in 2001, Ron Howard for Best Director, and um, it won Best Picture. The other nominees were Robert Altman for Gosford Park, which, Robert Altman, a legend, blah, blah, blah. It's like his last considered great movie, and it's just basically Clue, about like high class people and low class people. Um, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, which is my favorite of that of that group. This is the best director, and then you have David Lynch in there for Mulholland Drive, and Ridley Scott for Black Hawk Down, which a lot of people like, and I I don't as much, but I respect it. Like, there's a lot of famous people in it, but like, yeah, the movie I just find all over the place, not an interesting story. David Lynch for Mulholland Drive, which I just created a TikTok about randomly at 2 a.m. a few weeks ago. Um, uh, Set to Ghosts of Beverly Drive. Mulholland Drive, I watched after I had seen Twin Peaks season 3, which, keep in mind, I'd only seen the Twin Peaks season 1 pilot. So imagine going into like watching one episode of season 1 and then jumping right into season 3. And then imagine season 3 takes place 30 years later with an entirely different cast and a heavy plot line. And then I want you to further imagine that it's a David Lynch movie where crazy stuff happens. Yeah, that's a wild movie, but it feels like training wheels for Twin Peaks season 3. Um, yeah, and now I have used up the storage on my other camera, so that's like 2 cameras in a row. Yeah, where are we at, Chief, with this? We are at 1 hour and 55 minutes. Wow. Give me an Owen Wilson. Wow. Yeah. So now I want to go to, clicked on the wrong thing. Good thing my computer is responsive. I want to see the Academy Awards for that year because I want to see the best picture. The one that I didn't mention that was nominated, I mean, Moulin Rouge was nominated for Best Picture, which is kind of insane, although I get it because it has a unique aesthetic. Um, the one movie that I didn't mention was In the Bedroom because I only saw it recently, and it's a pretty good movie. Like, yeah, it's that movie is about a man who dates Marissa Tomei, um, and like who wouldn't, but she is much older than him, and she is a single mom, and the previous person that she was like married to or hasn't divorced from has some problems, and he's played by William Mapother, who's Tom Cruise's cousin. Looks a bit like Tom Cruise, you can see, and has that same Tom Cruise intensity. He's scary. Um, if you want to know who he is most famous for, he was actually on Lost, and he played Ethan Rom. So yeah, he's well cast in this movie. He's like intense. So I watched that movie and I liked it. It's from director Todd Field, who did that movie and then Little Children with Jennifer Connelly, Kate Winslet, and Patrick Wilson, and then did Tar. And the fascinating thing is that I saw Little Children a while after it came out. I remember watching the trailer and that great teaser trailer for Little Children. By the way, if you're looking for something to watch, I've actually seen clips of it on TikTok that it's funny that people share. It's one of the few movies that has like a narrator who's not one of the characters in the movie. It's just like a different thing, and it really like, oh, this, you know. And then somebody just posted it on Twitter, an image of it. I didn't think of it because the movie is so distinct. And I think of it anytime I see Jackie Earl Haley, who played Rorschach in the Watchmen movies. Anytime I see him, I think of him in this movie because he plays a pedophile um, who goes on, as somebody said on Twitter, the worst blind date in the history of film. Um, it is true, and it is in this movie. The ending, I don't remember too much of it, like a whole lot of it. It kind of like ends in an ellipsis, which isn't very satisfying, but it's like an entertaining film about like how bizarre life can be. And anytime I think of like a pedophile, I don't think of like in terms of film representation, I don't think of Robin Williams in 1 Hour Photo, or I don't think of Stanley Tucci in The Lovely Bones, although those are like really good performances. I think about Jackie Earl Haley in Little Children. So if you have the chance, just watch the teaser trailer for Little Children. And because it's also about um, Kate Winslet has an affair with Patrick Wilson while he's married to Jennifer Connelly, who looks, is a stunning presence. And Kate Winslet in this movie is like dressed down to look less attractive because the fact is they point out that when men cheat, they're looking for something like easier. So they usually cheat with somebody who's uglier than their original wife, which is just kind of fascinating because it's like, why would you trade down, you know? But it's like men being lazy. They don't want to be challenged. So think to yourself this: if you ever think about cheating on your wife, and you're like, "Oh, this person's good," and then you look at them, and then you look at your wife, and your wife is like a total smoke show, and then the lady is like kind of like okay, but like her eyebrows are like not behaving well, and that kind of thing, like Kate Winslet in this movie, and you're like, am I trading? And then it's like, yeah, you're bad, you know. But also like never cheat on your wife because that's like one of the commandments. Why can I not remember the Ten Commandments? Like, why can I not remember anything? I swear to God, I never had COVID. Um, but like, I swear to God, my memory has been reduced like 10 or 15% since like the 2020s. Um, yeah, you shall not commit adultery. Why couldn't I remember that? Because I was thinking of it in terms of like personhood, not in terms of principle. So yeah. Anyways, I guess watch Little Children, and that will no, it won't. The only movie that will stop you from committing adultery that had a legitimate like scientific empirical impact on it was the movie Fatal Attraction, which is about, Michael Douglas, who runs into Glenn Close, who in that movie is in no way attractive. And it's kind of like stunning that she's not like attractive. I would say that she's kind of ugly in the movie. Um, but, I guess you had to be there in the 90s. But, anyways, after that movie, the amount of men that like cheated on their wives went down severely because they saw how much it could like screw up your day. I will not be ignored, Dan, is the famous line from that movie. Um, but let's move on to another. Sorry. Sorry about that. I have had this cough for a month at least, and I called the doctor about it. It could be RSV, I guess, but it has not gone away, which is very annoying because I got it knowing that I was going to get it because family, kids, daycare, nephews, that kind of thing. Uh, really annoyed. And then, somebody got it, and then they got it, and then I got it, and I haven't gotten over it yet. And it's just very pesky, you know? And I'm realizing now, 2 hours into this podcast, that the reason, uh, like, for me talking and being like 2 hours is that I might have to leave the top 10 to a third part at the rate I'm going, because guess what? I decided to buy tickets to go see Civil War. Yes, I did, even though I know the ending, somewhat. Uh, and it's for noon or so. But I maintain that, I want to be well rested for it. And I remember I was supposed to go see the new James Bond movie one year in university with my brother. This was for Spectre, not Skyfall. And annoyingly, for something that doesn't even matter now, similar to how this isn't going to matter, I went to my first ever NHL game, and to date my only NHL game, watching the Sens play. And I took my camera and I put it on my laptop, which I still have, and just spent all night editing the photos, just like compulsively, which let me know that like maybe I have a future in editing, and I did, and still do, hopefully. Um, and I spent all this time like editing and like not even doing schoolwork and stuff. Or maybe I did a bit of schoolwork assignments. I don't think I would have totally done all that. But I was editing and organizing the file. I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to send it to someone, and it's going to be featured in like the Fulcrum or something, and I'll get a lot of likes out of it, and people go, wow, amazing. Will, you should be a photographer, and then somebody will see it and I'll be a photographer and stuff. So I was like editing till like 2:30, 3:35, and then I end up like, because I'm supposed to be editing, I'm switching between that and then also like doing some sort of assignment, and I'm like, oh, I'll get to it once I finish editing, and then I like don't, and then I finish the thing at like 6:30 in the morning, and then I like, in either like I sleep for maybe 90 minutes and I'm dead tired all day, and then I cannot sleep until like 4 o'clock, and then me and my brother are gonna meet up again after my classes and stuff. And as I get home after like writing a test, I'm like, oh man, I need to sleep. So I set an alarm at 4. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get up at like 5:30. The movie's at like 7, and then I fall asleep. And then I wake up to the buzzing of the alarm, and it's like it's been buzzing for a while, and I see that it's like 6:30 or 6:48, and the movie's at 7, like across town, and I'm like too cheap to buy it, so I'm gonna like take the bus, and I get a call from my brother who's like upset because it's like, well, now you're gonna be late. Like, are you on the way? You're gonna be late. And then he's clearly upset, and I'm upset because it's like I was rudely awakened from like, I could have slept from 4 in the morning, honestly, to 7 without like opening my eyes a lick. I was that tired. The amount of sleep deprivation you do is a rite of passage in university. It is something else, and it's like a wide way you learn about yourself. Like sleep deprivation is more effective than being drunk. So you're like very loosey goosey and like suggestible, and it is also like a form of torture. So don't let Dick Cheney tell you otherwise, because he argued in front of Congress that it like, or to the U.S. congressional hearings, that it was not a form of torture. Let me tell you, it is, because there's that wives' tale of the DJ who like was awake for 7 days, as part of like some kind of charity thing, and dropped dead. Did that really happen? I don't know. Um, but I slept and was so upset. I get on the bus, have to take a transfer, and I get there, and it's like an hour into the movie. And I go and I sit down, so I only see like the second half of Spectre. And I remember that at the new Cineplex Lansdowne VIP section, they had just put in those new exit signs, which from the red are now the iridescent green, which is way more annoying. And I watch that, and then I get an hour into it, um, and the movie's like over, and I'm like, like, this was the one weekend in my entire university career that my brother visited me, and it was like, was so upset, and I was so upset at myself because I didn't show him a good time. And funny enough, later on in 2021, when we went to go to TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, we could only get tickets for Training Day, which we were able to see for free on Crave, and it was supposed to be a Q&A. And from the description, we're like, okay, is the director going to be there or not? Are we going to watch the film as well? So I had to call up and said, yeah, we're going to watch the movie. So like, we watched the movie. It's like the most brilliant presentation ever, but it's also a movie I've seen once before, and my brother was just trying to get something for us for that, and it's great. But then after the movie, they're like, oh yeah, the director Antoine Fuqua couldn't be here, so here's like a video interview that we did. And then right as we get out of the um, video interview, like that they show just as a clip on YouTube that's like pre-recorded, they immediately put it on YouTube like that. And then I show my brother, and he was like, we were trying to contain how upset we were with that, because my brother paid like $50 for it, and he was like, no, it's like fine, because him getting his money back to him means that it doesn't have value. To me, it doesn't mean that. It just means that something doesn't have value enough. And truth be told is that you could honestly take it back to um, when Spectre was out in 2015, and I was late for the movie, and I thought to myself after watching it, like, I enjoyed what I saw, but I didn't see the whole film. And my brother didn't know what to do. He had bought tickets for us ahead of time. And I thought to myself, I'm like, if I tell a person who works there the situation and I explain to them, like, I'm sorry, but I didn't make it. We didn't have any other choice. Can I get my money back for my ticket? They would understand. And Cineplex was very understanding. The people there were like, yeah, just hop in line here. And we get in line, and we have to wait like a long time. My brother's like really upset about it. And we get to the front of the line, and it's just me waiting in line, by the way, like not my brother. And they're like, yeah, can I have a refund? And I'm like, here's the credit card. But it was my credit card. It wasn't the credit card that used to pay for it. And it was taking like, you know, 2 minutes at this point, which is a lot to keep people in line. They want to buy their movie tickets and stuff. And so all I needed was like my brother's credit card to get the money back. And he wouldn't do it. He's like, no, just to leave it. And it's like, oh, but if you do that, then all the time they spent waiting for us is gone, brother. And he was just like, no, it's just whatever. And we've all been out with a friend or whoever when spending money on something that doesn't work, or it's inconvenient, or you can't get tickets for somebody, and they're just like, just leave it. And the answer is always no, you know, because you never want to settle out. You always want to, fight for something because you care about it. And I would say that is like the origin story, now that I'm just reciting it to you, of me realizing that like my time has value in a way that I am going to get a return. And if I don't feel I've gotten a return, then I'll climb all the way up the ladder, the corporate ladder, doesn't matter who I'm dealing with, to get answers and find accountability. And that's what I do with everything that I get. If I don't like the presentation of, something on a streaming service, I'll complain and I'll get a free month. If my milk expires early, I'll complain to Seal, uh, and I'll get a true story. I got a coupon for that. I saw this one guy who said everything's negotiable, and I didn't buy it, but um, I understood that things are malleable, and because corporations are so big right now, they have automatic systems put in place for refunds and whatnot. So most of this stuff is done automated, and they're not used to face stuff. So if you tell somebody about your experience, they will be compassionate, because what does it cost the individual out of their own pocket that's like in charge of managing that kind of thing? Nothing. It's just peace of mind. And that's what it's all about, just giving people peace of mind. So I'm giving myself a peace of mind, similar to when I stopped watching Beau is Afraid, and I ended up still enjoying it. um, I gave myself peace of mind, said, let's not give me anxiety watching this, doing this right here. Let me just turn it off, go to bed. I didn't end up going to bed actually, but I probably, like, if I had thought that because I watched that movie that I got no sleep, that I ended up suffering that day because of sleep deprivation like I had back in university, I wouldn't have felt good. Whereas me turning it off, going to bed early, trying to get to sleep, and failing for a few hours, but getting to sleep at around 3 o'clock, and doing that, I slept at least knowing that I did everything possible. So, now I'm going to see my 51st A24 movie. And that's all because I've learned the value of the experience of giving yourself a break, and getting your money's worth. As for me, I didn't pay for A Beautiful Mind when it came out. My parents rented it on VHS. Hard to believe, or it might have been on DVD. It's hard to tell in that era because that was around 2001. So we had a DVD player in like the 90s. So I'll say it was definitely on DVD because we had the full DTS surround sound, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Um, and Man, it's weird then that I remember us renting movies on VHS because, we had a DVD player when I was like 5 or 6. So, um, uh, how could I remember that? The answer is movies are ingrained for me. They're ingrained in me. And the reason I suffered that day that I slept through and didn't get a chance to see Spectre is because I didn't respect my movie time. So that's what I'm gonna do. And because of that, I think I'm gonna cut it short. After I'll give you the top 15. So I'll give you one more after this Beautiful Mind movie I enjoy, but there are movies in that second tier of like, I like that movie, and you allow it to kind of play in your head and think about it and see clips, but you don't rewatch it a whole bunch. That's that movie. Because when you rewatch it, you're like, oh, I let it float up in my head a bit. It's not that good. A movie I really appreciated immediately when I saw it, and it's been studied in screenplay classes, is American Beauty. And American Beauty is a solidly well written, well performed movie which happens to star Kevin Spacey. It's Sam Mendes's first movie. He ended up directing Skyfall and Spectre, and Road to Perdition is another movie, 1917, which was on TV today. He also did the movie Away We Go and Jarhead, as well as Empire of Light. So he's kind of the king of getting the best people in the business to work on his movies. He got Christopher Nolan's editor, Denis Villeneuve's production designer, um, to work, and Roger Deakins, all to work on his movie 1917. In the meantime, he took that production designer away from working on Dune, which would have honestly been better. Dennis Gassner, who did Blade Runner 2049, if you don't believe me, watch that movie. The world it creates is amazing. And then he took Lee Smith, who's the editor of Christopher Nolan's movies. Granted, I did not like the editing in Dunkirk. I don't think highly of that movie, but he ended up getting a new cinematographer, a new um, editor for that, Jennifer Lame, for Tenet, which is edited pretty well, and it's the screenplay that's the problem to that movie. Um, uh, but again, with Oppenheimer, it's like they pull off the editing trick, but like I just find Lee Smith to be a bit like magical because I find that the way that The Dark Knight is edited is incredible. The way that Inception is edited is incredible. Interstellar has pretty good editing. Of course, Dodie Dorn edited Memento, and now he works for Zack Snyder on Rebel Moon, which again is actually a decently edited movie. I know people would disagree and think those movies aren't good, but I enjoy them because they're deep sci-fi. But yeah, Sam Mendes always works with the best, and he's like kind of Christopher Nolan adjacent, and that's why like Skyfall is definitely informed by that. But American Beauty was his first, and it's about a guy named Lester Burnham who decides a year from now he will be dead, and he narrates his own life story about his satisfaction with his life and his daily job, and he decides to quit his job and kind of go into a self-destructive pattern, which leads to his own rediscovery. I think it's a well done movie. There's a part in the middle. Um, the guy who wrote it, Alan Ball, is kind of a creep. And it would be like Kevin Spacey sees his teenage daughter's friend, and he starts to fantasize about her, and that's when if you've ever seen the image of like the blonde girl in like rose petals falling down, she's like naked. That's like the famous image, and Wes Bentley is in it as the neighbor who has a homophobic father, and it's about like suburban dissatisfaction. The mom as well wants to like reclaim control of her life, so she buys a gun. And so all of these plots like converge really well in a classic screenwriting sort of way. And yeah, it's really enjoyable. So yeah, American Beauty, give it a watch. Um, you know what, I'm gonna sprint through without forcing extra the from 15 to 10. Because here we go. The Hurt Locker is a movie that won in 2009. Catherine Bigelow, ex-husband of James Cameron, famously also nominated that year for Avatar. Um, Although we all knew he wasn't going to win, because who would win for Avatar aside from the technical stuff? Like, that movie, the story is like bare bones. Strong, like super solid, rock solid screenplay. Super predictable. We'd seen it before with, Dances with Wolves and Fern Gully and stuff like that. But, entertaining enough. It is so distinct in my mind, I've never had to watch it more than once. I watched it once and it's like stuck in my mind. Even when Avatar 2 came out in 2022, I said to my dad, I'm like, do you want to watch Avatar 1? And like, keep in mind, I had bought him like the director's extended cut on Blu-ray, which we hadn't seen, and he's like, no. And it's like Avatar 2, like the first one is so distinct. It's like I remember all the plot points. Like, they're crisp in my head because James Cameron is that good of a director. But his ex-wife, Catherine Bigelow, ended up becoming the first female director to win Best Director for The Hurt Locker, which has some crackerjack tense scenes. But it feels to me like a student film. Like, there's some experimental stuff, like the slow motion explosions. It really feels like Catherine Bigelow is reinventing herself, because she previously was famous for doing the movie Point Break and had done a couple of other things. The last major movie she did was K-19, The Widowmaker, which Harrison Ford did, and it takes place in a submarine. I haven't seen it. But she doesn't do films that often. She's done 2 films since then. She did Zero Dark 30, which is a better movie because it has, rather than Barry Ackroyd cinematography, which is close, shaky cam, kind of can't see, very disorienting, as Greg Fraser cinematography, which is wide, perfect lens. He also shot Rogue One, a bit of The Creator. He shot Dune, which he won his Academy Award for. And he also shot The Batman, which you can tell is like visually very good. And he was Oscar nominated for Shooting Lion, which is about a guy played by Slumdog Millionaire's Dev Patel, who uses Google essentially to find his parents. And Nicole Kidman is in it. It's an Australian movie, but visually also very strong. Haven't seen it yet, though. But anyways, The Hurt Locker is tense, close-up kind of action movie, but there's not a lot to it. It's a couple good cameos by David Morse. Ray Fiennes is also in it, and Guy Pearce opens it. And the best performance I think I've seen of Anthony Mackie, who went on to play the Falcon in the Captain America movies, and then plays the lead in Captain America: Brave New World. Or is it New World Order? I forget what they changed it to. But anyways, I don't think the movie is going to be good because the Falcon and the Winter Soldier had some pretty terrible writing, where they said, and I brought it up, how annoyed I am with that series because it's the beginning of the end for Marvel, where Falcon, as Captain America, is like, quit calling them terrorists. And it's like, Carly Morgenthau tied a person to a table or a radiator and then set the building they were in on fire and blew it up to send a message. That is a political goal. Like, that is straight up terrorism, and any good writer would recognize that that's terrorism. But Malcolm Spellman apparently did not, and just kind of like that movie was, that TV series with a movie style budget had like a good going, but had terrible writing. And the downside of like working with Marvel like that is that like that becomes your career, and it's kind of a bummer that like Anthony Mackie kind of doesn't have to try because he can always go back to the Falcon, because he does some interesting stuff. He kind of phones it in Twisted Metal, which is a series that I like based on, yes, the PlayStation video games, but he's never been as good as he is here. Um, Jeremy Renner has been better, but he's very good in this. And it's just kind of like a set piece machine for like independent films where it's like bomb disposal scene, bomb disposal scene, bomb disposal scene. But there's kind of not a lot to it that you're kind of like. I recently watched it with my sister. It's like, we'll watch this movie. And it was kind of a slog because it's just like, here's a bomb disposal scene, here's a bomb disposal scene, here's a bomb disposal scene. And it was just kind of like, we weren't into it emotionally. So, like, as an action movie, it's cool. Like, when he's pulling up all the threads and he discovers, like, all the bombs around him and stuff, it's, like, essentially the only successful movie about the Iraq War because it's about, like, addiction that parallels well with America's foreign policy of, like, the superhero addiction, addiction to oil and, like, finding the resources and stuff. And then here it's, like, war is a drug and Jeremy Renner is addicted to it, like he's addicted to the adrenaline rush. It works. It doesn't have as big of um, emotional hook to it, so like it doesn't have rewatchability. But yeah, solid movie. Zero Dark 30 is better um, and more satisfying, but Hurt Locker I've seen more times, so you know it's always funny. The movie you watch more isn't always the movie you like most. Um, for example, I've seen No Country for Old Men, number 14, once. I've seen clips of it multiple times. Um, it's a cool movie. There's a good, like, section from about, like, minute 20 or 40 into, like, the first hour that it's, like, the cat and mouse between Anton Chigurh and Llewellyn Moss, but a guy who finds a suitcase full of money at a drug bust, and the guy who's a stone cold killer has been sent to find that money. And there's a lot of middlemen and stuff, but you don't really figure out to the end what the theme is about. And even then, like, this is a movie that I had to like look on YouTube somebody discussing the theme of to understand it because I was so pissed at like the Coen brothers who directed it, their penchant for anticlimax. Um, and by the way, it's it's funny because like, where do I have Fargo here? And then I like remember that Fargo didn't win Best Picture, but like should have, because I mentioned it before. But yeah, this movie has no music. It's one of the tensest movies that I've seen. Has great characterization, and the ending makes complete sense. But it was like funny because like it came out the same year as There Will Be Blood, and There Will Be Blood is more instantly satisfying. Women have written about it, about like it's the first movie for male that they saw that's like come of age, and like I was so annoyed by that that I wrote like uh, about um, the toxic film discourse centered around There Will Be Blood because like I was offended that like this woman A talked about having a boyfriend in uh, university who made her watch There Will Be Blood, and I'm like, darn it, like where are all these women who like ended up becoming writers for successful magazines that had boyfriends who were like super into movies. I'm super into movies. How come I didn't find a girlfriend, who I could piss off, who could do that, um gra- it, granted, I'm guessing that she probably went to a really nice fancy university and maybe a really rich one, and that's why she ended up writing for a successful magazine or something. Or she could just be, a really hard worker because, women have to work hard in this world and blah, blah, blah. But, anyways, um, I asked my brother, I'm like, why do you think somebody wrote this article this way? And why do you think she didn't like it? He's like, well, it's a very American film. The person writing it is British. Um, and it's a big movie, a lot of set pieces in it. It was frustrating because her piece um, was so well written. it's a pretty strong argument because it backs off into this is my experience. And her experience is she never had finished the movie. And so she had difficulty like watching it, and it's associated with her ex boyfriend. So obviously, this person isn't going to enjoy this movie. But she had to kind of slam basically every uh, guy who likes movies because she had a bad ex boyfriend who showed her this movie that she didn't enjoy at all. Which, by the way, he showed her on his fucking laptop. Let me tell you, this is my least fucking favorite thing about this generation is like, let's watch a movie doesn't mean sitting in front of the fucking TV. It means sitting in bed on the covers watching something on a fucking laptop. Like, granted, I did stay over at a woman's house one time, and we did watch a movie that I'd seen before, I Love You Man, and we did watch that movie in bed together, and that was very pleasant. However, I had also seen that movie on DVD. Good movie. Um, and on a full TV screen. But if you're showing somebody a movie, like I just hate how our like it is a symbol of our generation using movies as sort of like a passable entertainment and like that having as much like emphasis and weight as like watching a movie for real. It's kind of bothersome because like everybody kind of has a different experience now watching movies. So, um you can't really write a fair article about a movie if you've had a terrible experience like writing it. And so I wrote thesis on triggering toxic film discourse on filmgamer.com is what it's called. And I'm a fan of that because I was so angry that I worked that hard. Not angry at her, mind you, although I found it very snooty and British, but I was annoyed because, again, The Guardian, who are so high on their own supply, just that, like, this girl dated a movie head and it wasn't me. And furthermore, that movie head screwed it up. Um, not their relationship, but screwed up the viewing of the film. Like, I even told my dad, and he was like, "Why would you show a woman that movie and expect her to like it? Like, it's an entirely male movie." Um, so don't be surprised these idiot movie heads. I swear I went to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where a boyfriend next to me was pointing out to his girlfriend other references to like Red Apple cigarettes and this, that, and the other thing. And then she gets up to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, clearly this is the end of the movie, of the 2 hour movie. And the boyfriend, what help is he? Absolutely none. And then he has the gall afterwards to um, wave at her like, "What are you doing?" when she came back after the climax of that movie. If you sit through Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and leave right before the climax of that movie at the house, that is a boring movie to watch. My gosh. And I have like secondhand flashbacks because I was like ready to say something. Even though we were watching the movies for the first time, I didn't know what could happen. I could feel it. So the boyfriend, I saw that like that's his responsibility to do that, and he's been so helpful, quote unquote, pointing out things in the movie. Let me tell you, if you point out something to somebody in the movie, and I make this mistake all the time too, unless they're like, even if they're not paying attention, because you need to find somebody has to find their way into the movie on their own. Okay, if you point out something that they weren't paying attention to, unless it's like well timed and stuff, it will either take them out of the movie or let them know, oh, I cannot pay attention. They'll point out the thing to me. You know, when you watch a movie, you have to discover it for yourself. You have to discover it on your own. So pointing it out to somebody when they watch it is not an organic way to enjoy a movie. It doesn't work. Um, so yeah, unless after the fact you can tell them about all these facts and that kind of thing, and then they can think back and exercise and go, oh, but watching a movie has to be an organic experience, and forcing somebody to watch something is not an organic experience. Um, but getting them to share an article and watch and read afterwards that they can talk about is, and that's how we engage. Um, a movie that was a hit when it came out, and I saw it in theaters and enjoyed it. Not a reason to watch it again, but I liked it, even though it completely BS's history as Argo. Wonderfully tense finale, well written, well directed by Ben Affleck. Should have won Best Director, not Best Picture. Um, yeah, uh, it is quite a good um, movie. Uh, it's well directed, well performed, has a lot of um, funny lines in it. Alan Arkin is great in it. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Could have won, but he had already won for basically playing himself uh, in that film. But that was one of the last few movies that was like a hit, like a big, like $100 million hit that like was an Oscar-y movie. And you don't get those anymore. If you ask me, like Oppenheimer happened to be a blockbuster. That was like the exception to the rule. But like up until the early 2010s, there was always like a movie that was like a hit, that was like a crowd pleaser, but like also a legitimately good movie that was good enough to win. And Argo was like one of those movies. That was the year of Zero Dark 30, Silver Linings Playbook, Les Mis, Lincoln, Life of Pi, Django Unchained, Beasts of the Southern Wild, and now more. Now, a couple of these, if I were to narrow it down to five, it'd be um, Argo because I like it. Zero Dark 30. I would put in Silver Linings Playbook. Um, Amour, and then the fifth one between all those would probably be Lincoln. And that I had a really good time actually seeing in the theater. I'll save that for another one. It was just like went out, had a nice time, went for drinks after, had a nice time, went to my place after, had a really nice time. It was just a night where everything flowed. Even though I missed the opening of the movie, which I did not see for several years, and that drove me nuts because the person I was with was late, but I let it slide. Let me tell you, I must have liked that person a lot because I did not throw a hissy fit too big when they came to that movie late. And they were like, "Oh, probably just missed the previews." No, we missed the opening of the movie because he didn't care. But I'll assume that they were dressed up nice because hey, they look nice. Um, but yeah, Argo saw it with my dad, enjoyed it. Moving on. Go ahead and watch it. It's worth a watch. Number 12 is the first movie I ever saw in theaters by myself. And I remember asking my mom, I'm like, can I go see this movie? Because I know it's going to be good. Like, I know it's going to be good. It is worth the embarrassment of asking, can I go to the movies myself? And my mom dropped me off because nobody else wanted to see this movie. And in fact, nobody wanted to distribute this movie. Back in 2008, um, Slumdog Millionaire was coming out, and Slumdog Millionaire was to be scheduled by Warner Brothers distributing it, and they dropped it because they didn't think it was going to be a hit, which in retrospect sounds nuts. So they give it to the independent arm of Fox, which isn't that big. They give it to Fox Searchlight, who has now directed like 8 of the last 10 um, who released 8 of the last 10 like best actress winners. Emma Stone, of course, like they had run through this before. She wins best actress. Olivia Colman for The Favorite also won best actress. So Fox Searchlight is like an awards contender. um, it's like it's the one studio after Disney bought Fox they didn't gut. They basically like this is a major awards contender. We're not gonna mess with this. So yeah, they didn't, and Fox Searchlight it ended up winning for Nomadland, which is on this list. I believe no, it would have been Focus Features. I think that released the King's Speech, but it's known for distributing Slumdog Millionaire, which like this kicked them off. 12 Years a Slave, Birdman, Shape of Water, Nomadland, all of which won Best Picture, as you know, because I've ranked them. So they didn't touch it, Disney, after they got it, except naming them Searchlight Pictures. And I knew this movie was going to be good. and I saw it, and it was like just as good as I had hoped. And I sort of forgive it because that was the year that The Dark Knight wasn't nominated, or Wally wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but they picked this movie, and this is that kind of crossover runaway hit, and was like, up until Oppenheimer, the highest grossing Best Picture winner since 2008, like worldwide. And like, I was so excited to that I had gotten the courage to ask my mom to go see a movie, because like when I would ask my mom, it's like, can I go to the dance, or can I do this? Who are you going with? Nobody. It's just me. Um, and she's like, no, you going to the theater yourself. That's ridiculous. Um, but you know what? It wasn't ridiculous because I saw a good movie and I had a great time. Even though it was just me, you don't have to wait for anybody. You don't have to worry if they're thinking. You don't have to worry if they're going to talk or be on their phone or something. You can get up and move seats if there's like not a lot of seats occupied. You can get up and leave if you don't like the movie, which I've never done. I've never walked out of a movie because I'm careful about what I choose. But like, I saw it and it was great. I remember, similar to the moment of the bomb drop in Oppenheimer, everybody was on pins and needles during the $1 million question. And either I read the plot description wrong, or it was an Argyle situation, like I mentioned before, where they had given out too much of the plot. But I wasn't like worried about it. I'm like, oh, it's a movie. Of course he'll win, you know. And it's funny because I've thought that before and then been totally wrong. And I'm like, oh, I was robbed of the tension because I didn't think it was possible. But yeah, great movie, great music, great editing, fantastic. It's kind of like a pioneer of digital camera work with Danny Boyle did with Anthony Dodd Mantle. Them going into the slums and whatnot. Dev Patel, of course, kicked off his career. It kind of kicked Toronto International Film Festival into another realm because this came out and it won the Audience Choice Award. And after it won the Audience Choice Award, um, they it ran all the way to Oscar night and swept the Oscars. It won 8 Academy Awards. No movie since has won 8 Oscars, like Slumdog Millionaire has. Um, Everything Everywhere All at Once and um, Oppenheimer won 7, indicating to people that in the modern era, it is just too hard for a movie to sweep because the competition is way better and we know better movies now. Like, we see international films now. So good luck the next movie to win like 11, like Lord of the Rings and Ben-Hur and Titanic, which is my number 11 movie. It's going to have to be some great movie. And so Titanic is a great movie, disaster picture rooted in romantic interest, incredible period detail, full of great character moments, which you don't get in a grand movie. A lot of times when a big director is directing something, they lose sight of like the personal, the little moments that distinguish character, that make people remember it. Little things like the guy jumping off the edge of it and hitting his head on propeller that we all laugh at. Um, you know, uh, Kathy Bates being in it as the unsinkable Molly Brown. It Kate Winslet is good in the movie. Leonardo DiCaprio is pretty okay. He's kind of playing himself, and hilariously enough, Leo, the method actor that he is, and he was trying to think of himself as big, and he's like, I don't want to be in like a big movie, like this big blockbuster Hollywood schlock and stuff like that. He was telling James Cameron, well, James Cameron is an actual filmmaker and makes movies, and he knows the craft and the language of film. And he managed to convince Leonardo DiCaprio because Leo comes in and all of the women, and he's like in his early 20s. This is like peak cute Leo. Like, he is a heartthrob. He's not really seen that way now. He's like too old. People make fun of him for having his young girlfriends because he's so aged out. And he likes the smokes. He likes the alcohol and stuff. So he has a bit of a belly and stuff like that. And took for many people too long to win an Oscar. I thought they could have waited a bit longer, but um, he's both the Tom Cruise and the Tom Hanks kind of, and still a bit more good looking than both. But he shows up to the audition, and all the women are like already swooning, and James Cameron can see it, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to pick this movie." And this was like a big part, and Leo was so popular, he was so confident that he didn't need it, and so Leo thinks it's just gonna be a meeting between him and James Cameron, because it's like, a big movie. Like, who cares? I already got it. I'm a hot shot. He was incredible, and still his best role to date. What's Eating Gilbert Grape, his first movie. My parents work with people who have those mental disabilities, and they say like everybody who does it, like Sean Penn, awful in I Am Sam. You know, they joke. There's that line in Tropic Thunder. Sorry, not politically correct, but go full retard. Um, um, that's what Sean Penn does here. My parents said the only person who I've seen in a movie who like that is what somebody with that disability would be like is Leonardo DiCaprio in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, in which he stars alongside Johnny Depp, who plays Gilbert Grape, and that's just a good, solidly uh, social issue of sorts drama by Lasse Hallström, uh, who directed it. Um, and yeah, he has not been as good since. I know people want to be like, oh, but he was so great in X, Y, and Z and Django when he said the N word, and but apparently, by some accounts, he was reluctant to say. Somebody born in the '70s, you know, I I doubt it that they had much trouble. You speak to people from like generations older than mine, and they do not hesitate to say the N word like not one time. They say it without blinking. They don't have the history of hate that we were like taught in school about that word. So like, yeah. And then I heard conversely around like Samuel L. Jackson or Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx said it that he was like, oh, he was a bit kind of too comfortable on it one time, and I had to like kind of slap him around. But then things got real. But yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio is solid in this movie. He anchors the whole film, and he didn't see it as a challenge. And he was just uh, said to James Cameron walking in, thinking he already got the part, and James Cameron is like, "Are you ready to audition?" And he's like, "Oh, I thought I like got it already." He's like, "Hey, if you're not, well, hey, thanks for coming in." And he starts to shake his hand. He's like, "Wait, what are you talking about? Like, I don't get the part." And he's like, "Hey, listen, I've been working on this film for like 2 years, okay? Like, because James Cameron into deep sea diving, wants to fund his expedition, so he promises to do this movie. He's like an oceanographer first and a filmmaker second, because so many of his movies, like this and Avatar and The Abyss, are about like the oceans, because he wants to live there, man. He was like the central authority on the Titan expedition disaster, which now seems like forever ago. It was only like a year ago. Um, and he, no budget too steep, no sea too deep, James Cameron. And he says, hey, listen, I've been working on this film for a long time. I'm going to be editing this film like a year from now, and you're going to be off, you know, partying with in LA with girls and stuff and off on another movie. Like, I am not going to risk this movie on somebody who doesn't care. And if they're not right, I want to make sure. So you're going to audition. And he was just kind of like, oh, okay. So, he talked with his mom who followed him on the sets, and he auditioned, and every girl, stood up and listened. And once he agreed to audition, James Cameron was like, that's it. That's the guy. He knew right away. But he had to test him. And Leo started coming to me. It's like, oh, what if he had a limp, or what if he had a accent, these things that would actually make him less attractive. And he was just kind of like, there's no edge to this character. There's nothing to grab onto. This is too easy. And uh, James Cameron said the opposite. And he's like, well, no, like what you're seeing there is like, when you add a limp or you add a tick to this character, it's really a crutch. Like, it's much harder to play a character who doesn't have any like recognizable tick. And, so he was able to see it as the role for what it was, as more of a challenge, and then he didn't know, how physically demanding it would be, and freezing, and the hypothermia, and the overscheduling, and stuff like that. And apparently, some of the things that James Cameron said to the crew and stuff was very not chill, um, and would not fly today. And according to Kate Winslet, who worked with him most recently on Avatar 2, which was funny enough nominated for Best Picture as well. She said he's really chilled since then. Would Leo work with him again? I don't know, probably not. She famously said, though, that she wouldn't, and now never say never. The funniest thing about this, though, is that, and it came out in, 1997, and then released in 2012 in 3D, and then re-released again for its 20th anniversary. And it was, for the longest time, the highest grossing film of all time, and won 11 Academy Awards, including Best Editing, which is kind of funny because people talk about the super lengthy establishing shots. It's one of the funniest, honest trailers is about that movie. So that movie, it's good. The action is great. The characters are great. The sweep is great. The nudity is great because it's like PG-13 nudity. I remember it was probably we joked about. I remember watching it at my aunt's place, and they had it on VHS, and they're like, "You see the girl's boobs," and then I always wondered, like, why not? And the answer to that is because, according to the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, although they're just the Motion Picture Association now, because the nudity is non-sexual in nature, similar to in the movie Total Recall, because it's like fundamentally non-sexual, like he's drawing a picture of her, there's artistry to it. Because of that, it is not considered sexual, therefore it does not equate to sexual content. It's artistic, so it's not meant to be titillating. So because of that, it became PG-13. Or James Cameron just had an incredible pull because this movie, which was made by 20th Century Fox, was greenlit by Jim Giannopoulos, who ended up going to Paramount, and I mentioned him earlier. He was fired, and then every movie afterwards was a hit. He greenlit this movie, and then went to Sumner Redstone, another guy who I mentioned earlier. He was the older guy who had the succession fight at the top of Paramount. Jim Giannopoulos goes into Sumner Redstone's office and tells him every day during the making of this film, the dailies are good. This is what's happening. And Sumner Redstone nods and is just like, all right. And it was just understood that them greenlighting this budget, which was, this movie was meant to cost like 100 million, and it ended up costing 200 million in 1997 dollars. This is 20 years ago. Okay, there were not the audiences that there were today, that you could guarantee a blockbuster on. This movie basically had to be the highest grossing movie of all time in order to be a success, and it was. So it was understood that Jim would be fired by Sumner Redstone if the movie wasn't a hit. And worse so, it was coming out the same day as the next James Bond movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, which GoldenEye had been a hit. And they were both releasing on December 19th. And so the movie opens, and it opens to only $28 million. Before I mentioned, a movie's a hit if it opens to 20 million. Civil War did. And makes over 100, but this movie costs 200. So how do you make 28 million if you lose your audience half a week? And basically, it played over Christmas and just continued to play for weeks until like into February. It was still number one, which is insane, until it was dethroned by Lost in Space, a movie I saw as a kid and liked, but don't want to watch again because it's apparently terrible. Although as a kid, it lit up my brain because I love that kind of deep sci-fi, but high production value. Although they didn't spend any on the writing department. But for Titanic, they didn't need to because James Cameron is the writer and the director and the co-editor. And yeah, that movie had all of the characters line up. They say, casting is 9/10 of it. Billy Zane is a fantastic bad guy. The Bill Paxton in it, and the shell story that like wraps around it of like the old lady is telling the um, story both to her uh, granddaughter, or is it her daughter? It would be her granddaughter, yeah, who is played by Susie Amy, who is, fun fact, James Cameron's wife now and has been. And they produce all their kids who arrange and allocate to all the kids in Avatar: The Way of Water. If you watch Avatar: The Way of Water, the Sully clan, the main character, has the same amount of kids that James Cameron does in real life, and they hate him just as much as they hate Jake Sully in the film as James Cameron's did in real life. So yes, that $200 million movie is personal. Um, Actually, I think it cost more than that because James Cameron flew out a number that said like, oh, it would have to make 2 billion in order to be profitable, and it ended up making over 2 billion and becoming the third highest grossing movie of all time, more than Titanic. But it was like behind Avatar 1, which is insane that this guy has like three times in a row made three 2 billion movies in a row. That's like absolutely absurd. Nobody thinks bigger than this guy. But he's a Canadian, for one, and he's an engineer for another. So all of his movies are engineered really well and are make you feel good, like most Canadians. So yeah, I've rewatched this film. I've seen it all the way through about twice. It's been on TV, and it's funny because people love to trash this movie. But there are so many things that are good about it. For one, My Heart Will Go On, which people just refer to as the Titanic song, famously Celine Dion and James Horner, again, were working on something. And James Cameron shooed it away. He's like, no, we're not doing this. They ignored him. They're like, we're doing this anyway in silent. And they composed My Heart Will Go On and then show James Cameron. He's like, oh my God, I need to like have this in the movie. And the record ends up being number one. And people's hearts go with this movie because of that. People like to rag on this movie of like, I remember them saying in um, religion class in high school to us, "That's not love, that's lust," you know. And it's like, I'm an optimist. I believe that it is love. That Rose loved him. And it's like, yeah, maybe she did. If they had stayed together, their marriage would have fallen apart or whatever. But it didn't, because it didn't. And that is love. Love is dreaming. Um, so My Heart Will Go On wins the Academy Award for Original Song, of course, and it's one of the best, pop songs of all time. Uh, and people still sing it. There's a lot of key changes in it. It's difficult to sing, and Celine Dion herself says like, every time I have to sing Titanic, it's like, oh, this. But when you're in it, it like fills you up and fills everybody up, and they love it. And that ended up being the 11th Academy Award that the movie won, along with Best Picture. And when James Cameron won Best Director, he was like, I'm king of the world, which is hilarious because they're shooting the movie outside and the sun is going down. They have to get the shot. And keep in mind, they're shooting on film, so they can't look at the dailies. They have to trust like the focus puller and stuff like that. And the sun is dying, and they're like, we need a big moment on the screen. And they're like, on the set, it's there, and James Cameron says through the microphone, "Say, I'm king of the world." And Leo's like, "What?" And he's like, "Just say I'm king of the world." He's like, "Ooh, what?" And then Leo is all getting technical while the sun is dying. And then they're like, "Oh, I don't know how it makes sense for the character." He's like, "Just sell it." He's like, "What?" He's like, "Just fucking sell it. Just say I'm the king of the world." Um, and then he's like, fine, so he did it. And then James Cameron, in his own words, he's like, I said it better when I won the Academy Award, which people thought he was like an asshole for, and maybe he was, but like he's an asshole who's right. So, you know, he fought and fired his entire crew on the movie Aliens because they were British. They shot in England to save money. And the British have tea time where they all have to do a tea time break, and they did not respect James Cameron. So he fired the lead like assistant director because, in his words, they were slow as shit and they were also behind on schedule. So James Cameron doesn't f around. You can see on Mythbusters, they were wondering about the lifeboat situation. And they're like, what if they did this, by this, by this? Did they do a good job? And then they're like, well, let's actually see. And then James Cameron gets up and he gets in one of the lifeboats in the like simulation that they have, standing in like an actual lifeboat that's like 12 feet above the ground, and stands in it, uh, again, like 10 feet above the ground, and like cuts the rope. And he's like, I want an action shot. I want like a bigger drop. Does anyone want to get in and do this? And then people were like, I don't know. He's like, I'll do it. He doesn't ask anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. He is in there in the water with them, which is the greatest thing that all I think about when I'm a director is that, would I ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself? Stunt people is a different thing because they're professionals and they don't have the experience. But I would never ask an actor something to do something that I wouldn't do myself. You know, you're in the trenches with them. That's how you get people to trust you and respect you. And on Titanic, people did not feel that way, and the way that he probably treated his crew, considering what was on the line, including like the main guy who was backing them, it was understood that he was going to be fired if the movie wasn't a success. Um, and now he's ridden his whole career on it, and ended up, running Paramount for a time because of it. So those guys came full circle back together. Um, well, no, because it might, it wasn't Sumner Redstone who was his boss at the time, Jim Giannopoulos. I get confused uh, because no, because Paramount took. So what Fox did was they were so uncomfortable. They did the same thing that Slumdog Millionaire did. They're like, there's this thing where you can offload the movie and sell it to other people or have them come in. And on Slumdog Millionaire, Warner Brothers dropped it and gave it to 20th Century Fox. And then it was doing like so well. They're like, oh my God, we need to get a piece of this back. So they teamed internationally, and Warner Brothers distributed it internationally after it was making so much hit money. So they're like, please give us a piece of this back. Let us come in on this. Fox did the opposite, where they're like, okay, we need to offload some of the budget. So what James Cameron did was like, okay, I've gone over budget. I'll give you my check. Like, I'll give you my payment. And he was expected to make a lot of money. So he gave that as damages because he'd broken his word. He had gone over what he said he was going to go over on. So he gave that to them as like basically, the collateral, and it didn't like make any money on it. And then he like needed to go further, and they needed more money. So they're like, okay, we'll let Paramount internationally distribute this movie. So that's what they did. And, the rest is history. It made $600 million. Nobody other movie did that until the Avengers came out. It won 11 Academy Awards, the most any movie has ever won. Although, curiously, no acting awards, which is the same thing happened to Lord of the Rings, which I will get to in my next installment. Yes, we are coming up now on 3 hours, which we just passed, and I gotta leave it there because it is 3:21, and I need to go to bed and wake up and go see Civil War. So I will go to bed, wake up, go see Civil War, not play video games because I keep meaning to play the Fallout game and then don't play it, and then look up movie stuff, and then look up social media stuff, and then complain that I don't have a job, and then look for a job and apply to jobs that I won't get, and then come back and do the cycle again. So that's what we're going to do here on the Film Gamer podcast when I get into the top 10 movies of all time. In the meantime, watch Titanic again. You've already seen it. It's a good movie.